Good morning. Get started, and we have a copy of the agenda, and the presentation is posted on Nearpod, and the code. Give you guys the code. What is the code? Oh, you forgot to sign in. IKGNX. That's the code to give this presentation. Each one will have a separate code, so before each presenter, I'll give you guys the code number. At nearpod.com, you just go and enter your login and you'll be able to look that up. I will also send the presentations later on today, so you'll have them on your email. Okay, well, I guess it's the start of Texans Day, and we have one of our best Texans here, Sarah Lakeland. And we're, she's been here with us several times, and we always like that she's come talk to us and keeps us updated and keeps us legal. She's our attorney, and we're really fortunate to have her. So please help me welcome Sarah.
Thank you. As Jesus said, I am a partner at Rogers Morrison Grover here in our Houston office. And I was looking at the sign-in sheet, and it's fantastic because when I'm looking at the sign-in sheet, we represent about 85% of you guys. As Jesus said, I represent Harris County Department of Ed and have for, let's see, it's going on 12 years now. And so we also represent many of you, like I said, Klein, Spring Branch, William Park, and Fort Bend, many others. So thank you for having me back today. We're going to jump around a little bit today, covering a few topics, just sort of hot off the press things that I've run into over the past 6 months or so that I thought that would be good to share with you guys. And as Jesus said, yes, it is Go Texan Day, although apparently only 2 of us got the message. At least I have a counterpart. 3, she's got a rodeo jacket on too. Here are my kids dressed for Go Texan Day this morning. They're super excited, and so please forgive me that as soon as I finish speaking today, I need to rush off to my 5-year-old's pre-K4 rodeo day, where they will ride stick horses around and do the barrel racing and all that good stuff. So that'll be fun. Here's a few things that we're going to discuss today. We're going to go over Form 1295 compliance, and if you attended the legislative update that I did a few months ago, we went over in detail what those changes are, but I've had several very excellent questions now that the new laws have gone into effect as of January 1st, and so I thought that I would share that information with you. Next, we're going to cover TPIA requests for bid information. This oftentimes will come to you as being in the business office. And there's been a recent case and a shift in AG authority on how they're handling these requests for bid information, and in particular the pricing that's in proposals and in bid sheets. So we'll go over that. And then finally, hallelujah, TEA has seen the light and is now made it clear about procurement of professional services. So first, the vendor disclosure of interested parties, also known as the Form 1295, because when it was first passed legislative session before last, it was HB 1295, thus the Form 1295. The legislature made some changes, not the one that we all wanted them to make, to 1295. Initially, the law was written where it was supposed to be, or we've been told, the intent was that these forms were only going to be required if it required board approval and was for $1 million or more. But when the law came out, what did it say? Or. So see, like the stickler in me, I'm a print journalism major and a lawyer, so it's a double-edged sword, and every word counts. A prime example of where every word really does count. So we were hopeful that this session they would make that change to and. It didn't happen. It's still an or. So you still need to have the Form 1295 if it goes to your board for approval, regardless of dollar amount, or if the contract for $1 million or more, which should also be going to your board as well. So you'll recall initially when the bill was passed that there were some exemptions, but the exemptions were pretty limited. You did not have to get a Form 1295 if it was a sponsored research contract of an institution of higher ed, if it was an interagency contract, or a contract related to health and human services, if any qualified vendor was eligible for the contract and the value of the contract could not be determined at the time the contract was executed. So pretty limited. Those exceptions are still there, but the legislature added 3 more exceptions to the 1295 requirement. And those are if you're a publicly traded business entity, including a wholly owned subsidiary of the business entity, an electric utility or a gas utility, no longer are those entities required to file the Form 1295. The other big change that came was, you'll recall, the last couple of years that this form had to be notarized. And vendors really jumped up and down that was a big impediment to have the form notarized. The notary portion was taken away, and so now it's just a, quote, unsworn declaration. But there's sort of a little hiccup with that we'll talk about. So here's what the new Form 1295 looks like. You'll notice that the notary provision has been taken away. And here's some questions that have been posed by clients that I thought were really good questions that I wanted to share with you guys. First, how do we determine whether a company is a publicly traded business entity? Second, why are addresses and dates of birth on the form? And what does that mean for districts? And so, yes, it's no longer required to be notarized, but now whoever's signing the form, including me when I sign these forms, I have to put my address and my date of birth. And so Selena Miller, who is at Whitley Penn, many of your auditors, called me and said, Sarah, I'm filling out this new Form 1295. Why do I have to put my date of birth? I was like, well, that's now required. She said, well, I don't like that. I don't want my date of birth floating around out there. I said, I don't either. I mean, I have to sign it too. And so we'll talk about what protections you guys as the district can give to us as vendors and not have our dates of birth float and addresses floating around out there. And finally, third, what happens if a vendor doesn't disclose an interested party on the form? That never happens, right? I mean, you get the form and they're like, none. You're like, really? Nobody owns your company? Seriously? So we'll talk about that too. So first, how do you determine if the company is in fact a publicly traded business? I love this. The Securities and Exchange Commission provides a free, searchable web database called, what else? Because we need another Edgar in our lives, right? So it is in fact called Edgar. I did not make that up. And it lists companies, and so it's free. So if a company is claiming, I don't have to submit a Form 1295 to you because I'm a publicly traded company, and you want to double check that it's not obvious, then go to this website here, and that will determine for you, take the guesswork out of whether or not the company is a publicly traded company. So birth dates and addresses. As I mentioned, the form is no longer required to be notarized, but the quote unsworn declaration includes a space where the authorized representative has to put the date of birth and address. As I mentioned, some vendors, including myself, are thrilled about that. One good thing is that the Ethics Commission, when you go online to fill out the form online, you're not putting that information into the electronic form that is posted on the Ethics Commission, but you are putting it on the physical form that goes to you as the school district, so ones that actually signed. And so what does that mean? Well, that means it's potentially subject to the Texas Public Information Act. So it's very clear under the TPIA that employees can request that their address remain confidential, but that protection is not currently available to vendors. It's only to employees. And just as a side note, note that job applicants' addresses have been deemed public. So just because you're an applicant you don't fall under this protection. And similarly, dates of births that are contained in personnel files have been deemed confidential, but similarly, no such ruling exists to protect those individuals who are not employees like vendors. And in fact, the Attorney General's office has historically concluded that dates of birth of members of the public, i.e. vendors, are not protected under common law privacy principles. Thankfully, though, there's been a shift at the AG's office. In a recent case, Paxton versus the City of Dallas has held otherwise. So now the rule is that dates of births of private citizens are indeed protected by common law privacy rights. And so the most frequent time that this is going to come up is if a requester files a Public Information Act request with you, the district, asking for the signed versions of the 1295s. I mean, I personally think they'll probably be rare because they can go on the Ethics Commission website and see the form there. But some, you still might get some because, for example, somebody might want to find out, well, I know that company has owners, or I know that a lawyer was involved and that should have, in negotiation of the contract, and so should have been listed, and the form doesn't have anybody listed, so I want to see who signed that form under penalty of perjury. And well, the only way to see who signed the form is to ask for it from y'all. And so if you get that information, note that technically you cannot just redact it yourself. Say, oh, Sarah told me dates of birth are now no longer subject to disclosure, but in order to withhold it, you have to go to the Attorney General's office and ask for a ruling. It's practically, what I would tell you to do is if you get a request for a copy of the 1295 that has a date of birth on it, ask the requester, look, this information is accepted under the TPIA. Will you allow me to redact the date of birth and address of the individual without the necessity of going to the Attorney General's office? If the person's reasonable, they're going to say yes. I mean, why would anybody legitimately need to know the individual's date of birth or address? If they're asking for it, they probably just want to know who signed the form. And so practically, that's how I would handle it. It's just ask the requester, can I redact the date of birth and the address information? If they tell you no, then you have to go request a ruling from the Attorney General's office asking to withhold that information. And you have to do that within 10 business days of receipt of the request. The next question I've gotten, not just with the new changes as of January 1st, but even before that, is are districts required to check the accuracy of a Form 1295? So the example I gave earlier, you get the 1295 and you look at this and you go, I know Bill. Bill owns a plumbing shop down the street. I know that he owns it, but he didn't even list himself as an owner. What's our responsibility as the district to call Bill and say, I don't think you filled this form out right? None. The way that the law is written states that you cannot legally, as the school district, enter into a contract unless you have obtained the Form 1295. It doesn't say anything about we have to check the accuracy, we're responsible for the accuracy at all. If we have the form, it's got the computer-generated number on the top, it's signed, we stick it in the file, we go online, we acknowledge receipt on the Ethics Commission website, and you have fulfilled your responsibility. We do not have any obligation to check the accuracy. It's up to the individual who signed, under penalty of perjury, by the way, to ensure the accuracy of the form, but not you as the district. One last thing I'll have to do. Moving on to our next topic, which is TPIA request for bid information. So a little bit of background. I think I've done a TPIA training here at the School Finance Council meetings before. I know if you've taken Management 306, the course at TASVO, I teach that course. I'm teaching it on Tuesday next week at TASVO as well, and we cover the TPIA training. So you've probably heard and will recall that the TPIA mandates that governmental entities, including school districts, notify third parties if their information is requested. What's the most common instance when this occurs, especially for you guys, is when a requester, who's often a competitor, wants the proposals or the bid tab for their competitors who also submitted a response to a bid or an RFP. So it'll look something like, I'm requesting copies of all proposals submitted in response to RFP number, insert number. So when that happens, we're required by law to notify the affected third parties, and there's a form on the AG's website that mandates this specific language that has to be included, that they have an opportunity to submit arguments to the Attorney General arguing why their information is accepted from disclosure. The other requirement for the district is they have to request a ruling from the AG's office. We don't have to take a position, and oftentimes we don't. It doesn't matter to us whether or not the vendor's information is released, but we're required by law to request the ruling and to notify the third parties. So once that happens, then savvy third parties will submit arguments to the Attorney General's office arguing why certain parts of their proposal should be accepted from disclosure. What's the one thing that they always want to accept? Their pricing. They don't want their competitors to know what their pricing is. Well, historically, for many years, the Attorney General's office has held that the terms of the contract, and including that part of the proposal, particularly the pricing of a winning bid, was public information. Even though vendors would argue under Section 552.104 that that information would give an advantage to their competitor. Historically, an advantage to a competitor portion of the TPIA was a snapshot in time. You could argue that successfully until a contract has been awarded. So if somebody files for copies of the proposals and we hadn't awarded the contract yet, then we too would probably argue, no, this should not be given because no contract has been awarded. But a 2015 case, which yes, was 3 years ago, but for some reason the AG's office is just kind of chugging along and finally recognizing that this is now the law of the land. And it's Bowen versus Paxton completely changed this landscape. And so now it expanded the test under that particular section, 552.104, to whether knowing another bidder or competitor's information would be an advantage instead of what it was before, which is the vendor had to prove it was a decisive advantage, which nobody ever proved. That when you receive the rulings back from the Attorney General's office, it would have this giant paragraph, and they would copy and paste every time. It was the same language about there's nothing more public than pricing. Well, now that has changed under the Bowen case. And so, additionally, it also changed with regards to the timing. No longer is it limited to ongoing competitive situations, i.e., during the procurement process and before a contract is awarded, but covers information even after a contract has been executed. So, going forward, third parties may argue, and in this case, often win, that their pricing information would give an advantage to a competitor or bidder, and therefore should be withheld from disclosure. That presumption that all pricing information is public no longer exists. So that's a big shift that we've seen. So recently, excuse me, I handled an open records request for Spring Branch ISD, and when Barbara Robillard was there, I miss her so much, where a competitor asked for not the proposals themselves, but wanted the bid tab. And it was a big RFP. It was for just instructional software. So it was, the bid tab was pages and pages long, but included the pricing on it. So under, just picking one, Edgenuity, for example, had your typical bid tabs information, but had the actual pricing there. And so I told Barbara, look, we need to ask for an AG ruling and notify the third parties. So we did. And many of the third parties argued to the Attorney General that their pricing information, if disclosed, would give an advantage to a competitor, and won. And so when we received that AG ruling back a couple of months ago, it ruled in favor of the vendors who had submitted arguments, and not all of them did. So the vendors who did not submit arguments, their pricing information got released. But the vendors who did submit arguments, particularly under 104, the AG's office agreed. And so we redacted all the pricing information for those vendors and then released it to the competitor. But following that AG ruling, in typical Barbara fashion, she had excellent questions about the effect of this new shift on the day-to-day practice in the business office and in the procurement office. And so one of her excellent questions was, what about the practice of calling out vendor pricing with the bid opening? Which was a great question, right? Here we have these AG rulings saying that pricing information is confidential and can be withheld from disclosure, but we call out vendor pricing when we open the proposals. Well, the answer to that question is that incredibly legal answer of it depends. And it depends on what type of procurement instrument you're using and whether you're using it's for construction services, so you're in 2269 land, or if it's for non-construction services and you're under Chapter 44. So for construction services, vendors' prices are required by law to be read aloud. So for example, if you look to the CSP section for construction services under 2269.154, it explicitly states, quote, the governmental entity shall receive, publicly open, and read aloud the names of the offerers and any monetary proposals made by the offerers, end quote. So by statute, you're required to read those aloud. So practically, what does that mean? If a competitor wants to know their other competitors' pricing, they're going to have to show up and hear the pricing being read aloud. For non-construction services, though, under Chapter 44, 44.031G just says, quote, notice of the time by when and place where the bids or proposals or the responses to a request for qualifications will be received and opened, shall be published in the county in which the district's central administrative office is located once a week for at least 2 weeks. You guys know this by heart. Before the deadline for receiving bids, proposals, or responses to a request for qualifications. So the decision for non-construction goods and services of whether or not you need to read the pricing aloud hinges on whether the procurement solicitation is an RFP or a CSP. So if it's a CSP, the CSP statute says the district shall receive, publicly open, and read aloud the names of the offers, and if any are required to be stated, all prices stated in each proposal. Well, I can't think of a time when a CSP would not have pricing information. Why are you doing a CSP? I mean, why are you doing a procurement, in particular a CSP, if you're not going to ask for pricing? So I'm not real sure why it says that if any are required to be stated language in there, because I can't think of a situation where pricing would not be required in the proposal. So if the procurement solicitation is a CSP, then you should read the pricing aloud at the opening as required by statute. On the other hand, if it's an RFP, the district is permitted, the difference between a CSP and an RFP, the main difference, is that you're permitted to open those proposals as you receive them. And there's no requirement for a public opening. Therefore, there's no requirement to publicly read aloud any information, including any pricing information. I seriously doubt that the AG's office is taking these distinctions into account between CSP and RFP when they're rendering the decisions about the availability of pricing and the vendor's ability to withhold pricing information. But for purposes of complying with the statutes, I would advise that the statute's plain language be followed. And so if you're doing a CSP, whether for construction or non-construction, you read those prices aloud because the statute requires you to do so. Any questions?
Two. So,
Of course.
the first one is the case with Boeing versus Paxton and public information. So, in cooperative purchasing specifically rated as it relates to FEMA right now, if the member needs pricing,
the four-letter word of FEMA, please.
if the member needs pricing to justify that contract was competitively procured, because FEMA is requiring that.
I think that's different.
It's okay because it's a member, not a vendor.
Correct.
Okay. And then the second one is
Because they're wanting to use that contract. This is not a vendor.
Right.
So, and remember that the purpose of the exception is the vendor has to prove it would give a competitive advantage. So how would it give a competitive advantage if you're disclosing it to a member at another school district, as opposed to disclosing it to a competitor?
Well, they could I won't say.
Yeah. Well, if they share the information, I mean, that kind of, but that's, we can't control that.
Right. Okay, and then the second question is, a lot of people are going to use the electronic bidding systems. So then how are they supposed to handle the pricing where it allowed for?
You still have to read aloud. You still have to open them. I mean, I think like with Wave, right, don't you, you still open them, right? And you still read them loud.
Just publicly.
Like, I mean, have your laptop open. So it's still, all of our CSPs and everything still say, deadline, an opening, like this date at this time.
And most people, if they do electronically, don't show up. They
Yeah.
in fact show up.
Right. And and as the AG continues, in my opinion, to apply the Boeing case and allow vendors to withhold pricing, my guess is vendors are going to start showing up because that's going to be the only way that they can get their competitors' pricing information. So whether it's physical, old school tearing open the sealed envelope, or if it's electronically, it's still an opening. In Chapter 44 expressly allows for electronic bidding, but the requirement to read aloud isn't changed, whether it's on paper or whether it's an e-bid. Any questions about that before we go on to our final and my favorite topic? So I also think I've done a professional services presentation before here at the School Finance Council, and you'll recall just a little bit of history that Education Code 44031F previously exempted professional services generally from competitive procurement requirements, but didn't define what those services were. And then the PSPA defined certain professional services, but there was a little wiggle room for interpretation because 44031F did not specifically define those. And so in 1996, there's an AG opinion that a lot of people still rely on, not me, DM 418, that what we refer to as district-determined professional services. And so you'll recall that's the opinion that says you would take into account the level of school involved, the level of skill and knowledge necessary to perform that service, if any certifications are required, things like that. And you could have district-determined professional services. And that was just through a fact-based inquiry. Well, fast forward, subsequent amendments to 44031F defined which considered professional services existed in addition to those set out in the PSPA. And so, as a recap, pre-1991, there was no statutory guidance regarding exempt professional services, and so it was left to the courts to decide what was a professional service or not. Fast forward a little bit further, former Texas Education Code 21901C said, nothing in this section shall apply to fees for professional services rendered, including but not limited to architects, attorneys, and fiscal agents. And so AG opinions relied on this particular section to engage in that fact-based determination to identify professional services that were not explicitly listed in either Chapter 44 of the Education Code or 2254 of the Government Code, which is the PSPA. And so an example is this AG opinion from 1988, which says that the AG defined professional services to include disciplines requiring special knowledge or attainment in a high order of learning, skill, and intelligence. So then we move to 1995, and the legislature repealed the section of professional services under the Education Code, which was 21901, and replaced it with 44031. And so now 44031F, since 1995, has said, this section does not apply to a contract for professional services rendered, including services in the architect, attorney, certified public accountant, engineer, fiscal agent. And then you may, at your option, procure those in accordance with 2254. What's missing from 44031 that was in the old statute in Chapter 21? Objection? The legislature removed the phrase, but not limited to. So whereas the old law said professional services include, but are not limited to, the following, when they revised it in 1995, they took that phrase out. At the same time, they also expanded the list that's specifically listed in Chapter 44 of professional services. Just to nerd out for 1 second, it's a fundamental concept of statutory construction under the law that the legislature's decision to add, or in this case, remove words during statutory revision has to be given significance. And so it's not that the legislature just decided, well, we're just not going to include them, but not limited to. By law, we're required to give that significance. And so for years now, I and my partner, Nikki Morris, who also does a lot of procurement law in our office, have been advising our clients, and I've said in presentations before, that means something. And so if it is not listed as a professional service in either 44031F or in 2254, it's not a professional service and you need to competitively bid it. There's been districts, though, that still have these district-determined professional services and even still have policies, local policies, that say, here's how we're going to determine what our district-determined professional services are. And what they're relying on is the 2010 FASRAG, which relied on that old AG opinion that provided that professional services could include those members of disciplines requiring special knowledge or attainment in a high order of learning, etc., including guest speakers, consultants, writers, and artists. That's still the 2010 FASRAG, which thank goodness is now being updated. And so the districts that still follow that district-determined professional services, or are still following the district-determined professional services, rely on this provision in the FASRAG as support. I, though, and others who prefer a more conservative approach in accordance with the plain language of the statute, have limited professional services to those that are listed in 44031F and in 2254. Hip, hip, hooray, hallelujah, TEA has seen the light. And so, in the fall 2017, if you were on the TASBO listserv, you probably saw this. The TEA Financial Compliance Division Auditor, Patrick Parker, recently clarified the TEA's position on this and says, Texas AG opinion, DM 418, was based on purchasing law in effect prior to the current PSPA legislation. It would be an erroneous assertion for a school district to claim the RFQ methodology for services not specified in the PSPA. Told you. Furthermore, the PSPA clearly defines which professional services may be selected using qualifications rather than competitive bidding. Only the specific professional services written within the code may be procured using the RFQ procedures rather than competitive bidding. So now it's clear. So if you are one of those districts that are still using these district-determined professional services, I advise you, now that TEA has made it crystal clear that it's not the law and we can no longer legally do that, that you might want to go and specifically have a local policy that references these district-determined professional services, that you revise that because of the obvious. Any questions? Yes, ma'am.
We're still left to interpretation to be a fiscal agent.
So, right, so that's a great question. So what is a fiscal agent? Somebody who's coming in like your financial management, financial consultant, what do they call? Let's say,
Financial advisor.
financial advisor thing, that's the word. That's a fiscal agent. And I think that's a clear fiscal agent. If you're hiring somebody who's a CPA is already covered. So even if they're not in a quote accounting capacity, that can also fall in to fiscal agent. Another one that I get questions about is the technology consultant piece. So your E-rate consultant, for example, would fall into that piece of the professional service under 44.
Like investment advisory type services that would fall
Yes,
under that category?
yes, that also Just for, if you didn't hear, she asked, what about investment advisory services? Yes, because those people who are doing that, they're probably CPAs or accountants at a minimum anyway. And so yes, I think that absolutely would fall under fiscal agent. But what I'm really talking about is, the all-encompassing consultants. Lots of districts would say, no, we don't have to procure our professional development people because they're consultants. We looked at their high level of skill, attainment, et cetera. That's not the law. And now TA has in fact affirmatively said that's not the law, that you need to procure those competitively. If you're spending more than $50,000 or more, and I mean, I can't imagine if you were not spending $50,000 or more in professional development. So those consultants, and I know here at HCDE we've implemented that years ago. And at first, yes, the consultants jump up and down and say, we're not doing this anywhere else. Why are you making us do this? This is ridiculous. And then what happened? They submitted their proposal. And because they wanted the work. And so, it's, as I tell people, I don't make the law. If you don't like it, you'll complain to your legislature. But we're implementing it. And so, don't be surprised if you get some pushback from that. But it kind of is what it is.
Yeah, and a lot of consultants still say, well,
I'm a professional service, or that's the other one. I'm a sole source. I'm like, yeah.
I mean, that had those helmets like the soft helmets, and they said every sole source, and I Googled and I said, look at
That's
all
the
these.
number one
And
thing.
they said, yeah, but we're the only ones with this color.
No, sole source is the other thing. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's the other one where consultants say, I'm a sole source, I'm the only one who does it this way. And the number one thing I tell people when they say, how do I see if somebody's really a sole source? I say, Google it. Because if anything else comes up other than them, guess what? Not a sole source. Because it's the same functionality, that's what you go to. You might like the color better, you may like that it has this added function, that doesn't mean that it's a sole source. But that's a good point too. Yes, sir?
Is there a distinction between professional services and services rendered contract services in our professional? I mean, when you say professional services, I mean, now.
So when I say professional services now, it's a defined term. So it's whether it's contract, it's usually going to be a contract, because otherwise it wouldn't matter, because you're going to go through, if there was an employee, so let's say you're hiring an in-house counsel as a lawyer, this doesn't matter because you're hiring them as an employee. This is if you're contracting for services.
It may not be a highly specialized piece of work they're doing.
It could not be. So today,
Professional, but it could be, painting or.
no, so it can't be, so all of that now is clear. So that's the district determined professional services, where you would look at like a plumber, for example. Well, I'm a master plumber. It took me X number of years to get this certification, etc. It's clear now. That's no longer, that's not, because it's not listed. Yeah, so none of that matters. If it's not listed in 44031F or in 2254 of the PSPA, it's not a professional service.
Then you're looking at 50,000.
So then you're looking at 50,000 or more into whether or not you have to competitively bid it. That's right.
In the past, we would have professional services with contracted services. Now there's only some that are professional services, and then maybe a whole bunch of others that are contracted services that fall under 44 that need to be procured according to those standards.
You either fall in one of the two buckets, and if it's not specifically listed in the statute that it's under professional services, then you're falling in the bucket of has to be procured if you're spending $50,000 or more in the aggregate in the fiscal year for those services. Great questions. Any other questions?
Is there any distinction between type of funds that are
No.
to spend their money?
Yep. He's asking, that's a great question. Is there any distinction between the type of fund? I would tell you the only distinction is if you're using federal money, you best be darn sure that you're complying with the statute because of audits and things like that.
Same standard for agency funds.
Say if you're using state and local money, this applies. Yes. Because remember, regardless of the source, if it's a donation or if it's whether it comes from tax money or comes from flow down money from the state, once the district accepts it, it's public money. And so 44 is going to apply.
Can you talk a little bit that I know some districts that when you receive a donation or the parents donate money and they want something done, and does that have to follow the code?
So that's a very awesome legal answer. It depends. So if it's the district that's receiving the money, so I'm going to pick, let's say, my law firm. I make a donation to Harris County Department of Education. As soon as they accept that money, it's public money because it goes into the general fund and it's in one pot. And can you really distinguish between my $1,000 donation and the millions of dollars of tax money? No. The distinction is if I made a donation to the foundation, and many of you have foundations, that's separate. And they're not subject to any of these rules. Same thing with your PTOs and truly outside organization. Your PTOs, like they're similar to the foundation, they're not subject to these rules either. But I will say this: let's say the PTO, has a fundraiser, collects money, and they donate a new smart board or 10 new smart boards to the elementary school. Once those are donated to the elementary school, that becomes district property. And so then the disposition requirements apply and all of that applies. But in terms of the purchase, PTO is not subject to Chapter 44, just like the foundation isn't either. Okay? Good questions. Just a reminder, I'm sure most of you will be at TASBO next week. If you missed the legislative update that I did here at the School Finance Council a couple of months ago, I'll be doing it again next week on Wednesday at 11 o'clock in room 201A. Also, we will be hosting a happy hour during the TASBO conference at the Omni Hotel at the Whiskey and Rye Bar. You absolutely are all invited. Please come and visit, even if you don't want a cocktail, have a Coke, or have something else. We'll have some good munchies and just an opportunity to visit with one another. And so that will be great for sure. Don't worry about RSVPing. If you just pass by and you see the big Rogers Morrison Grover sign, reception this way, just you stop on by. All right, thank you guys so much, and have a wonderful Go Texan Day.
Good morning, folks. We're talking a little bit about the E-rate. This is the 21st year of E-rate. I started at the very beginning with E-rate, which I don't know why I got started on it. It's going to have less hair. It doesn't get really great. It doesn't fall out. I pull it out during E-rate season, which is going on right now, basically. A little overview. We're going to discuss what's new. Some of the things that they're going to say, well, since 2015, what's new is because it's ongoing to keep updating, so I have to leave it what's new. About the bidding process, Form 470 and bidding, vendor selection, contracts, pre-commitment, document retention, which is usually 5 to 10 years if you have a modernization order for the FCC. Well, like always, E-rate does something every year to kind of, I guess, keep us off balance a little bit. They threw a little curve at us this year. Every year they throw something different. This year, they moved up the deadline to March 22nd. Normally, it's the latter part of April or May. And this year, they went along not telling us. So, we're all assuming it's going to be April and May, because they've been juggling those 2 months. Well, then all of a sudden, March 22nd is the deadline. So everyone's scrambling to get all their data in and all their stuff, getting board approvals, RFPs, Form 470s, Form 471s, everything. So basically, the process was cut 1 to 2 months short. So we're kind of scrambling. So there's a lot of things being done at the last minute, and a lot of all-nighters and things like that when it comes to writing the RFPs and putting them out. So we'll kind of discuss a little bit about that. Like I said, I've been doing E-rate for, I guess this is the 21st year. I worked with Mr. Mesqua. I was at LISD for 24 years as Chief Technology Officer. I worked in university level and community college level, and then I settled at the school district for 24 years. And then I went on my own 10 years ago as far as doing E-rate consulting. I also do technology consulting for schools. A combination of, you have to know technology pretty well to really be a good E-rate consultant. A lot of people say I'm an E-rate consultant, but they know about the forms, they don't know about the background, how to do it, so sometimes there's a discord and some things are left out or some things are not done properly, so you gotta make sure that whoever you do hire as a rate consultant knows the accounting process, knows how the district works, knows the budgeting process and procurement processes. Those go hand in hand, so it's very important that you make sure you have someone that does all these things. Okay, what's new? E-rate, which is Epic, it's a new portal, started in 2015, and I know in 2018 it's why I have it there because, you know, the district's users have to create district users, managers, user permissions, so when you start with something new, create a consultant profile to have a consultant, and have a consultant sort of profile, create district profiles for campuses, you know, how to use, you have what type of population each campus is it pre-K to fifth, and all that, addresses. You know, it's a good profile. The connectivity questions, they want to know what type of connectivity you have from campus to campus, from your core to the internet, so you have to fill that out. Manage contracts. Now, the contracts are uploaded. Basically, the portal changed from doing everything manually to automated, which is good, but of course there's growing pains. There are a lot of growing pains from 15, 16, 17 is better, 18 is better. So they've been doing well. I'll give them that. The first couple of years I wouldn't have said that, but now that it's settling in, they're doing well. The government is doing well in what they're changing. Upload RFPs and answer the PIA questions, which is program integrity assurance questions, where they kind of ask you, what are you trying to do? Why are you requesting this equipment? Or why is this a 2-year contract, or is it a contract, when did you sign? You should get a lot of those questions, and it would delay the process a lot. But now during the portal, we have to upload everything. If we're going to say we have an RFP, we have to upload the RFP. And we both have to post it on the website. So that RFP is the one that we have to go by. We can't go make a change and do something different. Everything we do to that RFP, if there's an addendum, we have to upload. And if we have more, let's say you have more than one addendum, you have to give an additional, and I'll talk about it a little more, it's 28-day waiting period before you get those contracts. Well, you have more than one addendum, you have to add 28 days for every addendum that you put up. You extend the 28 days. But then they come back and say, well, is it significantly changing the scope? Then if you can prove it's not, then you still go with the normal process of the 28-day waiting period. And the contract, when the contract's signed, you have to also upload it. You know, so all those things have to be uploaded. So now, before they would call, they would say, okay, at PA review, okay, send us the RFP. You know, scan it and email. Okay, we want to see the contracts. You know, or send the RFP, you know, contracts and all this stuff. Now that they're uploaded prior to awarding, it's easy for them to look at instead of calling you. There's a 14-day waiting period. We send the stuff that wait 14 days to get back to you. Yes, okay, fine, we agree, or no, we need more information. So the process would go for a long time, because normally the process, the funding year is from July 1, let's say July 1, 2018 to June 30th of 2019. That's the funding year E-rate. So in this case, we're doing E-rate in the year 18-19. Okay, so we meet the compliance of March 22nd, the window's closed. Then from there, they start reviewing all the applications. They start looking at them, and then they determine, okay, we're going to get funded, or there's questions. Okay. Before, sometimes it would take a year and a half to get funded before we went into the portal. And that's a long time, because you're already working the next funding year. So there's a lot of situations and problems that went online. Well, in E-rate 15, when they did the portal, it took about a year. We knocked out 6 months. 16 got better, about 9 months notification. Last year, 17, it was almost between 6 and 9 months. So they're improving by the time they let you know that you're awarded. Okay, in the portal, you created Form 470. Before it was manual, it was all paper. Everything was paper, and then the FedEx thing, and you said, well, it's overnight. Well, it didn't work for us 1 year at LISD. We had it done was enough time, about a week to go. And the board, in their wisdom, they said, well, no, we need to table it, because we're not satisfied with what, it's a lot of money. Because I think it's like about a $30 million project. So, and then we said, well, we need to have a special call meeting because it's due next week at a certain date. So, okay, we'll have a special call meeting, FedEx, it's overnight, no problem. And of course, Murphy's always angry. So they approved it, finally, they finally understood it, they approved it, we sent it. It was going to get there perfect on time, one day ahead of time, which we had it. But Murphy decided to create tornadoes. And Russian tornadoes hit the FedEx hub in Memphis that year. So nothing went out for about a week. So we got a nice letter from the SLD, which is the School and Library Division, that your application was denied because it was submitted late. And I said, well, but we had a reason, So I said, well, appeal it. So we got FedEx, they wrote us a nice letter saying it was their fault, because of weather and this and that. We said, no. It was an issue, I said, you have to appeal it, so we had to go to the FCC. It took a year to win the appeal. Yeah, so don't wait till the last minute because Murphy's always there. Even if you're doing it online, make sure you don't wait for the last minute because internet goes down, something happens with electricity, you never know what's going to happen. So I don't like them waiting for the last minute. Well, the Form 470, let me explain the Form 470. The Form 470 is like a bidding tool. Okay, you have two sections. You have a Category 1 and a Category 2. Category 1, it talks about your voice, your internet services, all your type of connectivity as far as from the core to the campuses, from the core out, internet. Now they talk about dark fiber services and lit fiber services. A few new things that they've added. Okay, so those are Category 1. Those are funded at 90% if your district is economically disadvantaged, meets an economic disadvantage of 90%. So it means you're paying 10 cents to the dollar. So it's good. And if you're going to bid it, there's a section set there because a lot of times you do 3-year contracts, and that's what I recommend that you do 3-year contracts because you get you save more money by doing that. Okay, well, there's a little box there that a lot of people sometimes forget. It says, is there an RFP? Okay. If you are putting out an RFP and you neglect to check that box off, you don't have a 3-year contract. You do have a 3-year contract with your vendor because you signed it. But with the SLD, you don't have a 3-year contract. So you have to go out and bid next year. And you better hope that that vendor wins because if not, that vendor's not going to release you from the contract. So you're telling the vendors out there, these are the services we're asking for. You're telling them that there's our RFP and it's on our website. And so that's what you do. You're saying these are the services we want. That's Category 1. Category 2, it's a little more complicated. It takes a little bit more when you perform 470 because that's all your infrastructure. Your switches, your routers, your access points, your infrastructure, Cat 6, Cat 6A cabling, your fiber, and all the modules that go with it. And that's changed. It's changed tremendously the way. Category 2 also was a 90-10%. Unlimited budget. Okay? But the only thing, caveat with it, you couldn't do a campus, you could do the campus now, but you couldn't redo it again until 5 years later. So that was no big deal. You set it up, and then you refresh technology in 5 years, that's great. Well, they said, you know what, we're spending too much money. We don't have that much money. So what we're going to do, and their infinite wisdom, this happened 3 years ago, is that now we're only going to pay, we're going to give you an 85% discount. That's one. 2, which really threw a big curve. We're giving you a budget of $150 per student to do your technology over 5 years. So that's not a lot of money the way technology is. So if you have 100 students, you multiply by 150, that's your budget for the 5 years. If you get 5 students next year, you can add that and you get a little bit more money, or you may lose depending, because you have to have your student enrollment. So now they're saying, hey, well, we're having a lot of money left over, that means districts don't need technology. And there's a big push to cancel some of the Category 2 But a lot of the districts are saying, hey, you make it where our technology is getting old now. You were giving us, all this unlimited, 5 years for a campus, which was good. If I spent, $4 million, that was going to ask me for 5 years. I don't have to refresh it. And that was okay with the way, but now it's $150 per student. You cannot fund a campus if you're going to refresh the whole infrastructure to $150 per student. You can't. So that's why there's money left over in the kitty. And they say, well, people, why aren't they using it? And that's the reason why. The districts, are saying, well, I'm waiting a little bit longer to refresh. Maybe they'll change the laws, or maybe we'll put money away, or maybe we're going to have to do leasing, purchasing the 85% for $150 per student, and doing a leasing option to afford it. So that's some of the things that they're doing. Okay. You do the Form 470, you submit it, and when you submit the Form 470, you have 28 days before you can allow a contract. Okay, that means on the 29th day, your superintendent or your board president, whoever is deemed the steward to sign the contracts, then you can sign the contract. If the contract is signed prior to the 28th day, you'll get denied because they have to have a copy of the contract. When you submit the Form 470, it says, okay, allowable contract date. So let's say you do it February 1st. Okay, allowable contract date is February 28th. Use that as an example. Okay, so if there's a signature and dated February 27th, the vendor can sign the contract ahead of time because usually in the RFP, to make it quick, say the vendor, please submit your contract, sign contract, and then the district signs it afterwards. Okay, because sometimes we have to go to the board. The SLD just says, it's up to you to meet your school requirements. We're not responsible. If you don't have to go to the board, you don't have to go to the board. You have to go to the board as long as you don't award anything within those 28 days and sign the contract. So basically, you do RFPs. On the 28th day, you open your RFPs. On the 29th day, whatever you want, you start evaluating. You have an evaluation table, then you do everything. And okay, finally, you select a vendor. You follow all the procurement policies of the district. The vendor selected. Then now you do the Form 471. That's telling the SLD that this vendor is a vendor of choice. Okay. And there's a contract that you upload to the Form 471 saying, this is a contract with the vendor of choice, and if you have an RFP that you're asking for, let's say, 50 switches, as an example, and you have 100, they're not going to fund you. They're going to say, hey, you said 50 in your RFP, so those 100 is on your own. We'll do the funding formula for the 50, not for anything above that, because again, they look at the RFP, and when you do the Form 471, you have to list the type of equipment that you're purchasing, the quantity, and the location. Because now that you have budgets per location, you have to list that. Now, another thing that kind of changes that a lot is like the network core. We call it the NOC or the core. Okay. Well, that's a non-instructional facility. So it doesn't have a budget. So what do? Okay, so you have to say, change out a wireless controller, change out a new core switch, add another router, and it comes out to $100,000. So what they do, that $100,000, they divide it into the campus based on enrollment, and they charge the campuses for that. So you see how it also now reduces the budget? You're asking for all this equipment, now you have to pay also what's in the core, because they don't fund the core, because it's a non-instructional facility, there's no students there. But it's allowed for funding because you need it for the district-wide, so they spread out the cost of that. So now your campus budget is further reduced. So there's more out-of-pocket expense now. And how are we doing that? Well, we have to get creative. You have to either pay what you can for with those, now it went up to, why this amount? $153.47. I don't know where the 47 cents came up, but that's what they're allotting now. It's $150.47. It went up in 3 years, it's gone up $3.47 per student. Based on that funding, whatever you can pay, the 85%, you pay the 15% of all that eligible equipment. It has to be important, eligible. Because there's some components within equipment that are ineligible. And the vendor has to say, when you do your RFP, you have to tell the vendor, give us a cost, you tell the vendor, fill out this cost sheet. The part number, the location, the quantity, the cost, the ineligible cost, and the eligible cost. Okay. Because from the total amount, you have to take off the ineligible, and that's the district. And you can only pay the eligible. So all those things are very important when you do your RFP. Because if you just put the whole cost, and on your Form 471, that's where you're putting the different components that you're purchasing. They go back and say, oh, but this card or this software that runs on this is ineligible. Like you have firewalls. You just cannot have your firewalls run management type services. You cannot have them run, there's new softwares now to provide security. They cannot be security firewalls. They won't pay for that. That part's another line. There's Umbrella, there's Firefox, there's different things in order to stop some of this ransomware and some of these intrusion detection software. That's ineligible. So let's say the firewall was, let's say, $25,000. And that software to run those particular things are $5,000. Okay, $5,000 now only $20,000 is eligible, and the 85% applies to that. So whatever the 15% is, the district plus the $5,000 the district has to pay for. So it's important that you ask them to separate the eligible and ineligible, so that we don't have to return money back. Okay, then the Form 46. Okay, once you get funded, they come back and they send you a nice letter saying, okay, you were funded. And the Form 471 is certified. And the Form 471 has to be certified here in Texas. Well, here because we're Central Time. It's at 10:59 Central Time. It has to say certified. When you push the button, if it's after that, if it says 11 o'clock, no, you didn't get it. So it's 10:59 Central Time on March 22nd for the Form 471 has to be certified prior to. Okay, once after they do all the stuff, the PIAs, they review, they call back questions, they send you questions and all that, you answer all that, and they say, okay, you're awarded. Okay, the next part is Form 46. Form 46. That's a document that you have to submit and you have to say, okay, I am accepting the award. Because if you don't do the Form 486 and you say I'm going to do the project, that project is kind of against your budget because you can decline it. So you have to make sure you do the Form 486. If you're going to decline it, you don't do the Form 486, you do the Form 500 to say, I decline this. Or the Form 500 can be used, especially in Category 2, sometimes because of whatever reason they could not complete the project by the time, you can ask for an extension. And you can say, okay, because we had weather issues or we had this, your building campus was not completed, you just submit that and they'll give you an extension and you should give you a year extension. So you're good with that. Now, what's really neat is a Form 498. Now it's direct payment. Okay. Because some districts choose to pay 100% of, let's say, Category 1. Okay, and then they get reimbursed afterwards. Okay, so you're getting reimbursed 90%. You have to do a Form 498. Before, it would take, in the Form 498, it would take half a year for the districts to get their money. Now, once you do it, they certify that everything matches what you're asking for is what was in the contract and all that. Within about 2 weeks, it's direct deposited into your account for reimbursement. So that's really been a great improvement for the districts. Okay, now the competitive bidding process, you must ensure, it's like the current bidding process. You must ensure that the process is fair and open, avoid conflicts of interest. Applicant, consultant, service provider. Applicant, service provider. Okay, that means, in my case, I cannot be, say, if I'm doing consulting work for Harris County Department of Ed and Erie, and then I'm doing some work for one of these vendors, I can't be doing both. I can't. Or I can't be the consultant and then sell them Category 2 equipment, like cabling, things like that. Can't do that. Or, I can't be going out with the vendors, happy hour and stuff like that, because that's a conflict of interest. And the same, the applicant during E-rate, I know some of these service providers, they become friends, they're the community, they become friends. I would recommend that within that time when E-rate starts, basically from I would say that September through the end, I would not recommend you go to lunch with them or do that, because another vendor may see that, and then they can muddy the whole water, a competitor. So I would try to avoid, being seen or being, going out with them. And again, it's open competitive, and the evaluations, read the Form 470 on responses and contract fine print. You have to make sure that all of theirs, if you don't, some of you, I think, send the contracts to attorneys. It's good if you don't, make sure you read it, because sometimes there's things there that, you sign it and then, you have to do other things that are not going to be part of E-rate. It's Form 70 indicates a service and category of service that which entitles you're seeking, must be posted for 28 days. Indicates if planning or issues an RFP, then you tell, okay, we're going to have a walkthrough. Okay? And that's how you can exclude vendors. Okay, like especially category 2. This is very important, because if not, you're going to have a very hard time distinguishing, the vendors that you need to look at. Because in category 2, normally you're going to table the district, you're going to put hardware. How do the vendors know how many feet of cable? How do they know the port density? How many things like that, Okay, so if you don't have a walkthrough, I'm a vendor, I'm going to bid any equipment I want. I haven't been there, so I'm going to bid less, and later on I'm going to tell you, well, it's a little bit more, this and that. So, and you're going to have maybe people from New York, there's no home companies here, there's nothing, they're going to be bidding on it. So you may get 100 bids, you're going to have to evaluate everything. So if you say the walkthrough is a mandatory walkthrough, that means they have to come to your district, they have to sign in. You should give them the scope of the work, what you had in your RFP, and then you take them to each of the campuses to view, okay, this is campus XYZ, these are all the clauses where we have the wiring clauses, so they do their measurements and stuff. So now you're going to get companies bidding on the same thing. Now, can you say, I want just Cisco equipment? Before you could. Now you have to say, or equivalent. Okay. You can't exclude a vendor for not being Cisco. Okay. You can give them less points in your evaluation table, but you cannot say, I'm excluding. You have to say, or equivalent. Okay. Daycare? Is it daycare? Daycare? So,
Sounds like a video.
yeah. So you see, those are important things on your on the services. Because if they don't show up and they send you a bid, you already stated in your RFP, you already stated your special instructions on your Form 470 that it's a mandatory. If they didn't show up, they can't. Okay? And if they just send a subcontractor, no. Because it has to be a designee, it has to be someone from that company. Even though they hire a subcontractor, fine, but that company has to be there. So those are things that are important that you have to make sure. Okay, and even if an RFP, you must describe the services you desire in Form 470. They have to, match. The Form 470 is like a summary, but the summary kind of has to match what your RFP says. You can't say, I'm going for switches on Form 470, and then you just do a router and access point on the RFP. Or, it's like, that doesn't make sense, so you won't get it rejected. Describe your project scope, location, and other requirements in detail. Must be available for bidders for 28 days. Sufficient detail in the Form 470 cannot provide generic descriptions, like I want a switch. You want a switch, and the RFP, I want a switch. Okay, well, you're going to get 100 different types of switches. How are you going to evaluate it? You have to be specific, okay? And I want a Cisco 3460 24-port inline power switch with 10 gig blades, okay? Or equivalent. So now that company has to get you a switch that's equivalent to the Cisco model. If not, you're going to get whatever. Then that was going to be cheaper, so you're going to have to put the cheapest one. It's not going to be what you need, and that's what happens a lot. And then the district gets stuck. Applicants must choose the most cost-efficient solution to the Form 470 or RFP with price as primary factor. You have to have a grading table. And the number one factor has to be price. But you can also have prior experience, equivalency, to have engineers on site, you want 2-hour response time, you can put all those things and then you grade it by that. But price always has to be like example, say price is going to be 30% or 30 points. Everything else has to make up the other 12. It cannot be more than 30, but that to make up the other 70 points. And that has to be on your bid document, how you're going to evaluate the vendor. You have to put that grading table there. You can't, it's in the RFP and not have a grading table and, say, well, now I can kind of do it to the way my vendors are. You can't do that. It has to be in the RFP. Okay, your evaluating process should be clearly documented and defined on the RFP. Includes ranking, charts, to support vendor selection. So you must have a chart which you put on your RFP how you're going to select your vendors. Retain all selection documentation, winning and losing bids, because sometimes they do ask you, okay, right now you only have to upload your bid and then the winning bid. But sometimes they'll come back and ask you, let's see, send us all the bids. I bet your mind complain, you never know. So you have to have those, that retain those for 10 years. Again, price of the eligible goods and services must be primary factor evaluation. Vendor evaluation begins 20-day waiting period. Selection of the winning bidder. Price again must be the primary factor. Other factors include weigh equally or higher than the cost, like I just mentioned. Our cost always has to be number one. Free services. This is where sometimes we get into trouble. Can't use E-rate to get free things, ineligible or eligible. Sometimes the vendor says, it's okay, that product is $5,000 ineligible, I'll discount it, don't worry, I'll get you something else. And services, I'll take it off this money, you can't do that. Cost of available goods and services cannot be inflated to cover the eligible cost, because there's been some districts that got into trouble. Like what they did is said, okay, this switch is $30,000, and the $5,000 is ineligible. When it was really $25,000 and $5,000 was ineligible. See how they're inflating the cost? So that cannot happen. They have to be very careful, because when they do audits, you're in trouble. A contract must be signed and dated by the applicant prior to the Form 471 certification. I said, remember, it can't be before the 28th day, and it cannot be after, in this case, March 22nd. We cannot have a signed document afterwards, because if you uploaded your contract, you have to upload it before the 28th. And you got to make sure it's eligible, okay? That the date is eligible. We've had one instance, and I won't mention who signed the documents. It's a doctor who started with an A, the last name. I think he's in the room, but I won't mention names. So they said, no, you signed it afterwards. It was not eligible, legible, I should say. Then finally they went back and they looked at it and they agreed it was okay, so they said, okay, I can get funded. But so make sure that the date is very legible. See, that's scary. Sometimes things like that, I pull it out.
They just don't know how to make number one. They didn't study that.
Yeah, they didn't know how to read. Voluntary contract extensions. Okay, this is important. There's times where you may have a 3-year contract or a 1-year contract, however, whatever services you're requesting. Put there in the contract, in the bid specifications, that you want voluntary extensions. And just in case, the price doesn't change and the district is okay with it, you have that in the back. You may not use it, but you have it there. Okay, the price can change if I write another RFP. You shop it around, and it's going to be the same thing. Why go through all that hassle? And you can show your finance people, hey, look, we're ending the contract. It's the same price for the next couple of years. We're going to keep the same price. You look with other vendors, it's still the same price. So if you can put it, and you have that, and the vendor has to put that in their contract as well, that they allow voluntary extensions, you can continue that on your RFP. On your services. Service delivery extension, deadlines for the implementation of non-recurring services is September 30th. That means what they do is they give you like category 2. It ends June 30th, but they say, you know what, something's a little late, we can give you to September 30th. Anything above that, you have to apply for. That's a Form 500. And it states there, okay. Form 471, okay. Applicants certify that they have secured access to necessary resources, have complied with HCDE state and local competitive bidding. Non-disclosure portion of costs for eligible services will not be paid by the service provider. Again, the non-discounted portion, which again is the 10% or the 15% now, that the vendor says, you know, I'll pay for it. Just give me the business and the portion that's not, I'll give it to you. You can't do that. No kickbacks, okay? Failure to comply with this program rules could result in civil or criminal prosecution. Persons who have been convicted of crime violations, you know, and they take this very seriously. There's been districts that have been banned for 5 years. There's been IT directors, there's been CFOs, there's been superintendents that have gone to prison. You know, one district, the purchasing CFO, and I think an assistant soup, where pictures were taken. They were down in South Valley on the ship on this boat fishing tour. That this one vendor owned the boat, and they continued taking for a few years. And the contracts there were like $100 million contract. You know, it's a large district in Texas. So all those 3 people plus the vendor, the owner of the company, went to prison. So they do take that very seriously.
Second largest.
I'm sorry?
Second largest school district in Texas.
Oh, okay, second. I said one of the largest. Yeah. No, it's not. But yeah, it's bad, you know, that happens before. But there is this vendor, and they dealt with small districts. So they had a Christmas party. This was about 12 years ago, maybe 15. They had a Christmas party. And they invited all the vendors, so the superintendents, you know, all the vice superintendents, you know, the CFOs and the IT people that had been invited. Okay. Well, they had door prizes. And, you know, it's down in South Texas, and there's hunting very big, so at the end of the day, the raffle, everyone got a prize. And it was the same prize. It was just $270 hunting rifle. Everybody got a prize. And the SOB ended up finding out, and a lot of people got in trouble. So a lot of vendors do that. So if a vendor invites you to lunch that you're doing business with E-rate, pay your own lunch. No matter how insistent, because they're not allowed to spend more than $50 a year on any one person in the district. Okay? So that would be my recommendation. Don't go. Be careful of the happy hours too, because now a lot of vendors aren't doing happy hours that are E-rate because people have things that happen and, you know, they're not allowed to do business anymore. Okay, the E-rate modernization order. That was the new goal, was to ensure affordable access to high-speed broadband, sufficient to support digital learning in schools, and robust connectivity, you know, for all libraries. So they were putting more money in category 1 now, which is your internet access. Maximize cost efficiency spending of E-rate, support purchases, making the E-rate application process and other E-rate processes faster, simpler, and efficient, which they have. Like I mentioned before, it would take longer manually, and now that we have the portal, the first 2 years, it was, you know, of course, anything new, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of glitches, a lot of things that have to happen. You know, in IT, you want stuff to go perfect, but it never does. Sometimes, you know, you throw a curve at them because you're doing something a little bit different. It's hard to program for all instances. And some of these things cause a lot of problems, you know, but it was, you know, growing pains. Now they're getting better. You know, now, you know, they're going in the right direction. I think it was a very good idea that they did. Goal 1, ensure affordable access to high-speed broadband. You know, they said an annual funding budget of $1 billion for funding internal connections to support high broadband services, and they're putting in more money. Test a more equitable approach to funding and connectivity for applicants who seek support funding year. It started 15-16, but of course it's been moved on. That's when all, I have the data, that's when it all started. And that's when the 15%, 85%, the $500, the $100 per student started. Because now they said, you know what, we're going to give more money instead of category 2, more money is going into internet services and to broadband. Now they're doing, you know, different types of fiber, dark fiber, lit fiber, and so it's been, you know, becoming more cost effective for districts to use some of these things. Test a more equitable approach to funding. Again, your focus is high speed and voice is going less. Now I'll talk about the voice in a minute. Maximize the cost efficient of E-rate spending, adopt transparency measures to encourage sharing of costs and connectivity data, encourage consortium purchasing, emphasize that providers must offer the lowest price, making E-rate applicants process of E-rate process faster, simpler, and efficient, which it has. It really has. It's a lot better now than it was before. So you have less questions. Funding is getting quicker now. Create training and outreach programs. Some of the things they do require the filing of all universal service applicants initially with the USAC. Direct USAC to adopt additional measures to improve the administration of the program. USAC oversees the SLD, which they have with the portal. Protect against waste, fraud, and abuse. They take any call seriously, and they call those code 9s. And I've seen everything. I've been, a vendor did a code 9 on us when I was at Elias, came back twice. Because, they're always trying to get in. They were never the lowest bidder, so they always would come up with something was wrong. And the thing is, the code 9s create a lot of problems for the district. So you need to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row, because they ask for all this documentation. One code 9 we're really able to get it out quick. It took us like 3 months, and they came back with a ruling. Okay, they're fine. The other one took longer, so they went all these elaborate things this particular vendor against that we're doing with this other vendor. But eventually we were cleared. Changes in priority 2 funding. Okay, no priority 1 services and priority 2 services not category 1, category 2. And category 2 services will fund $1 billion. And now it's getting a little bit less because people aren't using category 2 because of the way the formula. So some of it's been going to category 1, but some they want to remove it. If insufficient funding is available to meet the needs of particular discount rates, category 2 will be prioritized. They might change it to 80%. It goes to cost a little bit about that. The $153 per student there. Category 1, which is internet services, 10%. This is for libraries, basically. One of the things when they said voice, before they used to fund your phones, your PRIs, which is your phone system that you have on the computer, which is called Manager, cell phone services, it used to be 90/10. This year, it's only going to cover 10%. So it's going to cover 10%. So basically what I'm saying there is that before it was like internet access, okay? It was 90/10. It was just kind of 90%. Now your cell phone service is very different. Now they say, okay, only voice, the data plan is not covered in. So that's ineligible. So what you have to do when you get something after the vendor, give me the actual cost of the service, but break it out. Give me your data plan cost and give me just your phone cost, your cell phone service. So then, okay, you say you're paying $50 a month on a line. Okay. They say the data plan is $30. Okay. So your actual cell phone is $20. So now what you do, you get the 20 cents, the $20 for the 30 is ineligible. The district has to pay all the $30. Now the $20 before was okay, you pay only 10% of those $20. Okay. So it was like great. Then it went down to 70%. Then 50 to 30, and this year it's only 10%. Next year, voice goes away completely. The district has to pay 100%, which is your fax lines, any analog lines that you have, your cell phone service, you have to pay 100% of that. Your PRI, which again is your call manager, your IP phones you have, that phone service, now you have to pay 100% of that. Starting next year. This year is only going to cover 10% of it. So that's a big change. So those are things that are coming out that have been reducing for the last 5 years, basically. So this is the last year, 2018, will get funded at 10%. Again, E-rate is all about dates. So, and you have to work very carefully. The consultant you have or your IT person has to work very carefully with procurement and procurement and of course the finance area, because there's laws of procurement and you have to do whatever the district has, the local policies, state policies. You have to make sure that they fit within what you're trying to do with 20, because that's what you just get for 28 days. But if you say ours has to be 30 days, that's okay. As long as it passes the 28 days, doesn't care about the other 2 days, you can do it later on. You can do it on the 31st day you open your bid, that's fine. But you can't do it before the 28th day. If you say it's 2 weeks, you can't award. You can open, but you can't award or sign contracts until after the 28th day. So you have to be careful with that. Again, dates, you have Form 470 when it opens, you have Form 470 when it closes. Like, what's today, the 22nd? So 23rd, okay. Today's the last, yesterday was the last day to do Form 470. Why? Because the 28th day waiting period would be the 22nd of March. So if you do it Form 470 today, you're automatically out, because you can't go until the 23rd of the following month. So you see how the dates and stuff like that, it's very, very important that you look at all those dates. So you have to work hand in hand, whoever your IT consultant is. And you have to have a plan of what you want to do. You just can't be now shooting from the hip, I want to grow my network, I want to do that. So you have to have a good plan of how you want to do your resources now. Basically, you know, and again, all this information I got from the SLB website. I didn't make up these dates or things like that. It's not make believe. So that concludes my presentation. Any questions or anything? If you ever have any questions, my phone number is there, my email address is there, or contact me on Messenger. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
My name is Ernie Davis. I am the business analysis or financial planning manager for the technology organization within ExxonMobil Chemical Company, which is a part of ExxonMobil Corporation. I'm here today to talk about our outlook for energy. I'm not going to talk about the price of oil, unfortunately, so if you're looking for that, I apologize. But what I am going to talk about is this study that ExxonMobil does every year. Is there an issue? Did I push it? Yeah. Okay. No problem. Okay. Yes. Now I think. So I don't participate in the team that puts this together. I'm not an expert. I'm somebody that participates in a program that ExxonMobil has in which we're interested in sharing information with the public. The Outlook for Energy is a study that we do every single year. It's a long-range forecast that's developed by a team of scientists, engineers, and economists. It's done in-house. It's a bottom-up, data-driven study, so it's not just pie in the sky thinking. We do a very detailed analysis to take a look at what energy will look like over the next several decades. And it's something that we actually use internally. I mean, the energy development and production process or business is a very long-term and very capital-intensive business. And so we have to project where we think the energy markets will go over a very long period of time in order to factor into our own business decisions. And so we use this study internally to make decisions about where we're going to invest. And we choose to share it publicly, as I'm doing today, basically to help the public better understand the world of energy and how it impacts you. I mean, everybody, most likely, you don't really think about energy. You go to the gas station, fill up your car, there's always gasoline at the gas station. You flip the light switch, your lights always come on. But behind the scenes, there's an immense and very expensive industry that makes sure that the lights come on and that there's gas available at the gas station. This study focuses on the consumers of energy, the billions of people around the world that depend on energy for their way of living. It takes a look at the energy choices that those consumers will make over the coming decades. And by putting those together, we strive to provide a realistic view of the future, recognizing the dual challenge of providing reliable and cost-effective energy while at the same time minimizing our impact on the environment. So this energy outlook, we've been looking out to the year 2040. For those of you that have heard my discussions in the past 3 or 4 years that I've been here, we're still looking out to 2040, but we're updating the energy outlook each year with actual data. So looking out to 2040, the global population is expected to grow by about 25% and will be roughly 9 billion people by the year 2040. During that same period of time, global gross domestic gross domestic product, is expected to grow 2 times where it is in 2016. And interestingly, energy demand during that period of time will only rise by about 25%. Historically, energy demand typically mirrors GDP. So as you double GDP, you would typically expect to double the amount of energy required to drive the economy. But we actually project that energy demand will only increase about 25%, roughly equal to the growth of the population. And we forecast that the economy will shift to lower carbon fuels. That, together with efficiency gains, will enable CO2 emissions to actually peak around 2030 and then begin to decline, and will only be about 10% higher than they are today in 2040. So abundant supplies of energy will enable people to raise their living standards, while at the same time the carbon intensity of the economy is projected to decline. So the amount of carbon dioxide released per unit of GDP will actually go down significantly during the time period that we're looking at. So this slide, I'm just going to touch on just some key takeaways. If you take away nothing else from this presentation, I hope you take away some of the things off of this slide. So energy powers modern economies and living standards. By the year 2030, the world's economic middle class, which numbers about 3 billion people today, will grow to more than 5 billion people. During that period of time, this growth will coincide with vastly improved living standards, resulting in rising energy usage, particularly in the developing world. As I mentioned, global energy demand will rise roughly 25%, and that rise will be almost entirely in the developing world, particularly China and India. Electricity demand will nearly double in those non-OECD countries, the developing portions of the world. And amongst the fastest growing, rapidly expanding energy supplies for electricity will be from wind and solar, which will grow by about 400%. Natural gas, excuse me, natural gas, due to its abundance and its versatility, will make a very valuable energy source to meet a wide variety of needs going forward. And we expect natural gas use to increase more than any other energy source, and will represent about half of the energy used to create electricity by the year 2040. Oil will continue to play a role, particularly in transportation. But as we look out through 2040, its growth will actually be more driven by commercial transportation, not light-duty transportation, but by commercial transportation as well as the chemical industry, something that we're seeing here along the Gulf Coast today with a significant expansion in the petrochemical industry. And as I mentioned, the decarbonization of the world's energy system will accelerate. So while we will increase our population significantly, while we'll increase energy demand significantly, and while the middle class will grow significantly, the carbon intensity of the entire economy will actually decrease significantly. So what will the energy picture look like in the future? To answer this question, let's start by analyzing long-term demographic and economic trends. So as I mentioned, world GDP is likely to double. Non-OECD countries will increase by about 170%, while OECD countries such as Europe, United States, Japan, and such will grow by about 60%. And the non-OECD share of global GDP will rise to about 50%. So the world's wealth will be roughly split between OECD and non-OECD countries by the year 2040. China is likely to be the largest contributor to GDP gains, with growth similar to that of Europe and the United States combined. India will also grow strongly. Its share of global GDP will double over the outlook period. All regions will show significant gains in income. China's GDP per capita is likely to triple. India's will also triple. It will still be roughly half of what China is. Africa's GDP per capita is expected to increase by 50%, but will still significantly trail other emerging markets. As I mentioned, the middle class is projected to grow by about 80%. There's roughly about 3 million people that would be classified as middle class today. By the year 2040, that's expected to grow to about 5 billion people. So about 5 billion people out of a total population of 9 billion people. So over half of the world's population will be middle class. Rising middle class means billions of people with longer, healthier, and better lives. The Asia Pacific countries, as you can see here in red, they represent the largest increase, with India and China each reaching a middle class of over 1 billion people each. Africa, Middle East, and Latin America are also expected to increase. And the middle class populations in Europe and the United States and North America will essentially be flat. So energy plays a critical role in supporting rising modern living standards around the world. Electricity used per capita or per person is one important measure of energy consumption. And a country's energy consumption per capita is actually well aligned with its income level, as you can see in this graph. So as the wealth of a nation increases, its energy consumption per person goes right along with it. So about half of the world's population today resides in countries where the average electricity demand is less than the energy consumed by your standard appliances, your microwave, your refrigerator, your washer, your dryer, etc. And even today, there's over 1 billion people in the world that do not have access to electricity. So despite growing population, despite growing GDP, energy demand is only forecast to increase by about 25%. And that's primarily due to savings brought about by efficiency improvements. Without those efficiency improvements, you can see in the chart here, energy requirements would be significantly higher than what we're forecasting. The demand growth is primarily from non-OECD countries, like I said, China and India in particular. Global demand for energy will increase in 2040 to 680 quadrillion BTUs. It's a very large number. Non-OECD share of the energy demand will reach about 20 or 70%. China and India will contribute about 45% of the world's energy demand growth. And the combined share of energy used in the United States and Europe will actually decline by about 30%. So despite growth in population, despite growth in GDP, in more modern countries such as the United States and Europe, the actual energy consumed will decrease. So global energy demand will continue to rise. Continued urbanization and significant expansion of the middle class, particularly in China and India, will help drive this trend. And energy demand for power generation will account for about 50% of the total global energy demand growth. So global demand reaches 680 quadrillion BTUs, like I said, up 25%. And this breaks down that energy into the 4 different sectors that we analyze: transportation, residential and commercial, industrial, and then the biggest one, electricity generation, which is the largest and also the fastest growing demand sector, reflecting strong growth in global electricity demand. And you can see here there's a wide variety of energy sources and types used to support these sectors, particularly in electricity generation. which has the most diverse sources of energy to produce electricity. Natural gas demand will increase significantly, and oil demand will grow, but primarily to support commercial transportation such as ships, planes, and large trucks, but also in the chemical industry. Personal mobility demands can continue to increase, but the use of more efficient cars, trucks, and SUVs in the light-duty sector will actually lead to a peak, and then as you can see here, an eventual decline in the amount of energy used in the light-duty area. We forecast that the average new car fuel economy, which is about 30 miles to the gallon today, will improve to about 50 miles per gallon by the year 2040. Growth in economic activity and personal income drives increasing need for commercial transportation, so you can see the growth in the heavy-duty area as well as the aviation and marine area. Now, historically, and I alluded to this a couple slides ago, growth in personal mobility and commercial transportation has trended very closely to GDP. So as GDP increases, you've got more things being built, more things being shipped, and so more people buying cars and so forth. And so these two have trended together quite closely. But here in recent years, the trend has started to decouple as economic growth and transportation energy demand has started to decouple from GDP, reflecting efficiency. Significant increases in the future fuel economy across all transportation modes will lead to a further decoupling. As you can see here, as GDP nearly doubles, consumption of energy for light-duty cars, trucks, SUVs actually starts decreasing. A very significant decoupling from the GDP trend that we've seen in the years past. Driven by an increase in personal income as well as population, the global fleet of light-duty vehicles is projected to grow about 80% to approximately 1.8 billion vehicles. Now, conventional gasoline cars will still be predominant, primarily because of their cost, functionality, and their increasing fuel efficiency, but they will peak and actually start to decrease around 2030. Electrification of light-duty vehicles is anticipated to grow strongly, including full hybrids, plug-in hybrids, battery electrics, and fuel cell cars. It's anticipated that full hybrid vehicles will reach approximately 15% of the global fleet of light-duty vehicles by 2040. So this increasing access to vehicles drives a worldwide increase in personal mobility, and as such, energy demand. So if we assume that the current fleet of cars and the current fuel efficiency, this blue bar would indicate how much more energy would be required in the transportation sector. However, major gains in fuel efficiency in conventional vehicles, as well as changes in the fleet mix to more and more hybrid vehicles, will actually offset that, such that in the end, energy demand for light-duty vehicles will peak before starting to trend down. And by the year 2040, it'll actually be flat to where we are today. Fuel demand in the United States is anticipated to decline as growth in fuel economy outpaces the growth in the amount of vehicle miles driven by the U.S. public. China will moderately grow their light-duty vehicle energy demand until around 2020, and then they'll plateau. And India will continue to increase their light-duty vehicle energy demand over the outlook period as strong gains in access to personal mobility, more and more cars. But you can see the trend for Europe and the United States with significant decrease in the demand for energy in this sector. So the industrial sector, this includes energy used to build cities, power factories, refine fuels, produce food. Almost half of the world's energy is used in the industrial activity. In industry, we use fuel not just as a fuel, but also as a feedstock, particularly for the chemicals industry, where we make chemicals, asphalt, lubricants, waxes, and other specialty products. In this sector, oil, natural gas, and electricity basically supply the energy sources for the industrial sector, roughly 1/3 for each of them. The use of coal and oil will actually decline in favor of natural gas and electricity. Coal will still have a role in making steel and cement, and oil will still have a role as a feedstock for chemicals. But consumer demand for plastics, fertilizer, and other chemical products will increase as incomes increase. Within the chemical sector, the olefins and aromatics, which are the basic building blocks of plastics, adhesives, and other consumer products, will actually grow at a rate faster than GDP. Manufacturers see plastics as lightweight, durable materials that can improve performance of their products. The chemical energy demand in total will grow by about 40%. Demand for electricity, this is the four sectors that we look at, this is the sector that's the largest and projected to grow the fastest. It will continue to rise as energy used in powering a wide range of needs such as lighting, appliances, e-commerce, and so forth. Power generation uses the broadest array of different fuels. Electricity is made from coal, natural gas, nuclear, hydroelectricity, solar, wind. It's the one sector that has the broadest array of fuels used within that sector. Electricity demand will grow faster than any other job. So while total energy grows by 25%, electricity generation will grow by 60% over the outlook period. And the world will shift to lower carbon sources for generating that electricity, led particularly by shifts to natural gas and renewables such as wind, solar, and nuclear. Today, coal is used to produce about 40% of the world's electricity. We anticipate by 2040 that coal will only be used to produce about 30% of the world's electricity. Industrial share of the demand for electricity reduces as China's economy shifts from heavy industry to services and light manufacturing. And electricity use in the transportation sector will nearly double. Still only about 2% of the total, but it's going to grow significantly as more and more hybrid vehicles are on the road. So in the interest of time, because I know I'm a little late, Jesus would like me to get out of here a little bit earlier. I won't spend as much time on this slide. This slide just takes a look at the different types of fuel and the net change in delivered electricity. As you can see, the fuels used for electricity, wind, solar, natural gas, nuclear, and other renewables, all have very significant growth. There is some growth of coal in Asia Pacific. The only other thing I'd like to note on this slide before I move on is that while capacity utilization improves over time, remember that the wind doesn't always blow and the sun isn't always out. And so there will be improvements in capacity utilization for wind and solar, but capacity utilization will still only be about 20 to 30% by the year 2040. So if you put in capacity, a solar plant that is able to generate a certain amount of megawatts, you'll only use about 20 to 30% of that capacity. So electricity generation by region highlights the diversity of the fuel mix. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this. You can kind of see, take a look at the United States, you can kind of see what types of fuels are used to produce electricity in the U.S. And you'll see a significant decrease in coal, a significant expansion in the use of natural gas, as well as an expansion in the use of wind and solar. So natural gas is reliable and efficient for baseload electricity generation. Its flexibility actually makes it very well suited to meet peak demand and to back up intermittent sources such as wind and solar that aren't necessarily always available. So the role of natural gas and electricity generation mix varies by country. Those countries that are very rich in natural gas obviously use a lot of it. But this outlook reflects our best view of technology improvements and policy evolution. And we test the sensitivities of that. So if you take a look at it, accelerated development of wind and solar due to swifter cost declines or more generous targeted support policies for government will actually reduce natural gas demand. Conversely, how the public feels about coal and nuclear may force a shift to more and more natural gas. So there's a little bit of sensitivity. So, I mean, while we put a lot of numbers into this and try to develop the best estimate we can, there is some sensitivity depending on how policies and consumer attitudes change in coming years. So the dual challenge of providing reliable energy to support prosperity of the world is coupled with the need to do it in such a way that we reduce the impact on the environment, including the risk of climate change. And it's a challenge that ExxonMobil takes very seriously. The long-term nature of the climate challenge promises an evolution of available solutions as our knowledge expands, as technology advances, and as markets adapt. So policies that promote innovation and flexibility afforded by competition and free markets will be critical to help ensure that nations pursue the most cost-effective opportunities to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions while still meeting their constituents' energy needs. So renewables and nuclear see strong growth, contributing close to 40% of incremental energy supplies. Natural gas grows the most of any energy type, reaching a quarter of all demand. Coal's use, as you can see, remains significant in some parts of the world, but loses substantial share as the world transitions toward energy sources that produce fewer emissions. Global CO2 emissions rose about 40% from 2000 to 2016, despite roughly a 10% decline in emissions in Europe and the United States. We anticipate global CO2 emissions to likely peak in 2040 at about 10% above where they were in 2016. Combined, as you can see in the graph, CO2 emissions in Europe and the United States will fall about 15%. While China contributed to approximately 60% of the growth in emissions from 2000 to 2016, we anticipate their emissions to also peak around 2030 and gradually decline. But it'll be emissions outside of North America, Europe, and China that rise the most, having risen 35% from the year 2000 to 2016. Emissions in those countries will actually increase by 50% between 2016 and 2040. So the primary driver of increasing global CO2 emissions from 2000 to 2016 was economic growth. Improving energy efficiency across economies helped slow that growth. And as economic growth continues to drive CO2 emissions going forward, efficiency gains and a shift to lower emission energy sources will help substantially moderate emissions. So as the world's economy nearly doubles, energy efficiency gains and a shift in that energy mix will contribute to a more than 40% decline in carbon intensity. How am I doing on time? 10 minutes? Oh, wow. All right. So we've gone through demand, we've talked a little bit about emissions. We'll take a look at supply, and I'll go through these a little bit more quickly. We break down supply to meet demand, looking at liquids and gas. So global liquids demand will increase by 20%. As I mentioned a couple of times, commercial transportation and chemicals industry will lead that growth. Advances in light-duty vehicle efficiency will actually lead to a decline in the amount of liquids used in transportation. Asia Pacific will account for about 65% of the increase in global liquids. You can see on the far right, they're the one portion of the world that increases significantly in their consumption of liquids. The liquid supply chain highlights regional diversity. The key things I want you to take away from this graph is really to take a look at how the various regions of the world transition, particularly in North America. We anticipate by the year 2040, North America and the United States will actually be a net exporter of oil, and no longer be an importer of oil. And you can see where those supplies are coming from. They're coming from what we would consider unconventional resources, such as tight oil, deep water, natural gas liquids that are coming out of the shale oil revolution. You can see significant increases in the supply of those sources to the point that the United States and North America will become a net exporter of liquids. Russia and Caspian and the Middle East, they're large exporters today and they will continue to do so. In Asia Pacific, a net importer today will become even more of an importer as we look forward to 2040. But supplying the world with oil, with liquids, is a very expensive and ongoing proposition. More than 80% of the new supply needed over the outlook period is actually needed simply to offset the decline in oil fields that are currently in production. In fact, the IEA predicts that we need about $400 billion a year in investment around the world simply to maintain current production. But global oil resources are abundant. Oil resource estimates continue to rise as technology continues to advance and we're able to access more and more different types of oil. I mentioned tight oil, deep water, oil sands, shale. All of these were inaccessible years ago. But thanks to technology advancements and improvements, we now have access to them. Less than 1/4 of the oil resources currently identified have been produced to date. If technology stopped advancing and we couldn't find ways to access any other types of oil going forward, there's currently enough identified oil resources to continue to provide oil to the world for 150 years at current demand. I've mentioned a couple times that natural gas share will grow. It will grow significantly. It's abundant, it's versatile, and it's a much cleaner energy source than coal, oil, and biomass. You can see here where we project natural gas share in each of the 4 sectors. You can see a significant increase in electricity generation and a bit of an increase even in transportation. And this chart kind of illustrates, the percent of energy demand, supplied by natural gas in various different regions. And you can see an increase in pretty much every region except for Russia. So this is just like the oil slide, except it's presented a little bit differently. But if you take a look at natural gas supply across the region, it's kind of the same story. Asia Pacific, a net importer today, will continue to be a net importer and will require imports of even more and more natural gas. The Middle East, Russia, and the Caspian region, exporters of natural gas will continue to do so. In the United States, which is roughly, in North America, which is essentially balanced in 2016, will begin exporting natural gas via liquefied natural gas going forward. I'm going to skip over the LNG trade. I don't want to bore you too much, and I know we're short on time.
Did you really get a copy of this slide?
I sent Jesus a copy of it, and when I get to the end, I'll tell you it's all available at exxonmobil.com as well. So,
and I'm going to try to make it a little smaller because it's got a lot of graphics.
It does have a lot of graphics.
Make it, because you may not probably be able to get it through an email. So
Yeah.
I'm going to try to.
I think it's 4 or 5 meg. It's a pretty large file. I do want to touch on this. Just like the story that we heard in oil, the story in natural gas is much the same. The advancement of technology has expanded our recoverable resources of natural gas over time. Less than 15% of recoverable natural gas resources that have been identified have been produced to date. Based on the resources that we have identified to date, there's enough natural gas remaining to power the world for another 200 years. And that's even if we didn't find access to any others, natural gas. I've tried to point out that technology is vital to making advances and being able to continually dramatically reshape the energy playing field and supply the world with the energy that it requires. And this graph just kind of illustrates that. It kind of sums up my talk. As energy demand increases by about 25%, carbon intensity goes down due to improvements in efficiency and improvements in technology. You know, we've come a long ways from the 1860s, and technology has essentially allowed us to do that. Technology has made more types of energy and more sources of energy available. You can see the shift in the types of energy used over time, and that's been made possible by scientists, engineers, and entrepreneurs who developed new technology. When you look back at 1860 and all we had was biomass and coal. When you look out to 2040, we're getting energy from biomass, coal, oil, unconventional sources of oil, natural gas, unconventional natural gas, hydroelectric, nuclear, as well as other renewables such as wind and solar. So, in a nutshell, renewables and natural gas renewables and nuclear energy will see strong growth over the outlook period, contributing close to 40% of the incremental energy supplies to meet demand. Wind and solar will actually grow the fastest, growing about 6% per year. As I mentioned, natural gas will grow the most of any of the energy types, and by the year 2040 will be used to meet approximately 25% of the world's energy demand. Coal remains significant, particularly in some parts of the world, but it will lose substantial share of the total energy demand as the world transitions to lower emission energy sources. So, meeting the energy demand of the world in a safe, reliable, and environmentally sensitive way is a huge undertaking. It requires expanded trade and significant investment. It also requires innovation and advanced technology. So I hope by sharing this outlook, giving you a little better appreciation for what the world of energy looks like. There's a number of different sources that I'd like to direct you to if you're interested in learning more about it. Like I said at the beginning of my talk, we put this energy outlook together for our own purposes. It drives our business decisions, but we share it with the public because we'd like to get the public engaged in understanding what it takes to supply the energy demands of 9 billion people by the year 2040. So hopefully this has piqued your interest, and I invite you to seek out these sources for more information. What I've presented today is actually a fraction of the entire energy outlook. This outlook is a much larger presentation. It's available at exxonmobil.com. I invite you to get involved in the discussion and understand what's going on with energy. So with that, I tried to stay in 45 minutes. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll entertain any questions if anybody has any. Are you still awake? I know it's tough being the last presentation before lunch. Thank you very much.
I don't know if you mentioned that, how do you foresee fracking?
How do we foresee fracking?
Are we going to more fracking in the future?
Well, the outlook really doesn't delve into individual types of technologies on how we're going to get it to energy. But yes, I think the reason you see the United States becoming an exporter of oil and an exporter of natural gas is largely due to fracking. Fracking with shale oil, shale gas, particularly in the Texas area, Texas, New Mexico area, as well as up in Pennsylvania. I see that technology continuing to go forward unless government policies are put in place to restrict it. It's becoming much more cost-effective. Again, technology advancement is the key. So fracking is becoming less and less expensive with the advancement of technology. And it's also becoming less and less disruptive to the environment around it where it's done. But I think it will continue to be heavily used, yes. Yes?
I'm not sure if you want to answer to this, but there's a lot of messages out there as far as the outlook for a lot of those people that got laid off, over the past few years.
Mhm.
Do you, the projection that you see, I guess, for the future with energy, do you see a lot of those engineers that have been jobless for 2+ years being hired again, or do they need to diversify? What is your opinion on that?
I can't really speak specifically to anybody that's been laid off, but I will point to, and I think everybody's probably seen it, there's been a resurgence in manufacturing in the United States for a number of reasons. ExxonMobil in particular, our CEO has announced within the last few months that we intend to invest $50 billion on the Gulf Coast alone. That's not globally, that's just in the United States and the Gulf Coast. We're investing $50 billion in new chemical and refining facilities. So we're not alone. A number of different companies are expanding. I'm in the chemical sector, so I can point out, Chevron Phillips is starting up a brand new chemical plant at Cedar Bayou. We're starting up a brand new chemical plant as we speak in Baytown and Mount Bellevue. We've made announcements about other large projects, one of which is in the Corpus Christi area. And we're not alone. A number of companies are expanding. And so I can't speak to the specific individuals laid off, but I would say, in the petrochemical industry in the United States, there is a lot of growth going on right now, and I would anticipate a significant amount of hiring to fuel that growth.
Okay, rolling on in Harris County Appraisal District. I know a couple of you have seen me before, and just to give you a little bit about our office, Harris County is massive. We have roughly 1.7 million parcels in Harris County that we do the reappraisals, for, and saying reappraisal so much later. And in comparison, we're the largest in the state. We have roughly 20% of the entire value here in Harris County compared to the rest of the jurisdictions, the rest of the appraisal districts out there. Our total valuation, when you look at the office buildings downtown, when you look at the apartments, the houses that we live in, the 1.1 million houses that exist in Harris County, our total valuation in Harris County is over $500 billion. And that's a lot of money. We have this past year, we had almost 400,000 protests of those 1.7 million. We have about 5,000 of those that go to litigation every year. And it's the high dollar stuff. We have about 7,000 of those that go post-ARB to arbitration. And we serve about 4.5 million citizens. I tell people that we are the biggest that does in the world that does a reappraisal every year. You've got Los Angeles County that obviously is larger, but they have Proposition 13, and Chicago still has a lot of politics in their appraisal. And I got to go back to this one, I didn't show it on the slide. Anyhow, one thing that we did is we became one of the employers of choice in Harris County. This was a thing that we participated in for a governmental agency. We were one of only 2 that made the top 30 of large companies. We competed against all the oil companies. We competed against other companies. And I tell you this because you all have people that you know, sisters, brothers, kids that are looking for jobs that just got out of college. Send them our way. We need good people. And I say that right now when you look at our agency, when the economy is doing well, we lose a lot of good talent because it's hard to compete. And then, of course, we see the inverse. But it is a great place to work, and it was proven by the 84,000 surveys that they did. Anyhow, here in Harris County, we created a new verb, and with all the ISDs in here. We said we've been Harvey. We coined that, and everybody in this county was Harvey, and so were the 30 counties along the whole Texas Gulf Coast. I mean, you had total devastation in Rockport, the flooding that existed all the way up the coast. And when you look at these pictures, and I'll just have them up here for another second, it is alarming. I mean, it has affected everybody's life. We had roughly 10% of our staff that was affected. And just talking to Charlene a second ago, I didn't know her house flooded, and just found that out, and still going through that. We've got a board member that had FEMA come out there, and they were measuring the water level, and they didn't pick up the base of the fireplace, and they just measured from the base of, they didn't go from the base of the fireplace to the top where you have the brick around. They went from the brick up, and they only measured 9 inches. And there was, I think, another 11 inches that existed before, and they ran that through their query on what kind of check he would get, and obviously he was wrong. Now, to get FEMA to come back out there was almost impossible, and this past Tuesday I was in Austin testifying in front of the Senate Finance Committee, and one of the senators brought that issue up because there were some folks there that were there that could help him. Now, just imagine you have somebody, a governmental agency, coming out there to help you. They come out there to try to help you, and they make the wrong measurements and put them into a system. You get a check. It's not a sufficient check because you had a substantial amount more damage done to your property. And then you keep calling, and you sit on hold, and nobody returns your call, and it has to take a senator to get that fixed. So everybody's been affected with this drastically, and it is sad. Anyhow, Harris County, I've been there almost 30 years this summer. If I make it, my board can get rid of me within 72 hours, and during these times of trials and tribulations, it is a difficult job to be in because our normal statutory requirements require full-time work from a full-time budget, and then of course you have to throw reappraisal in there, and I say reappraisal. It was something that exists, and that's what we're going to talk about. But years ago, we used to deal with customers as they would pick up a phone and call us, or they would come and see us, and we have roughly about 50 to 60,000 people that come and visit us, and we serve over 2,000 calls a day. And up until the late 1990s, I was a taxpayer liaison officer, and I created what we called the e-bank. And the e-bank was just me responding to property owners by myself to have these people utilize this technology so they could contact us 24/7. Well, that grew, and I say it grew. We handle a lot of folks that way in our office because guess what? We're all busy, we're all working, and sometimes you can't get to us. And if you can get to us at midnight when you got finished changing a diaper, or you're up because you can't sleep because you got problems with work or whatever, you can contact us. So we then move forward, and then we have this declaration that's declared, and we need to come up with immediate innovation. And I say immediate innovation. We had to figure out, I was sitting at home because everybody was flooded, nobody could move, and we had to come up with some ideas. And we need to do this as quickly as possible. And I called my IT director and I said, we need to create a devoted phone line that we can just get people to call in 24/7 because we can't handle all the emails with people showing up because they can't get to us. So we started that, and we had that up and operational before we had the office was open. So people, when we put a press release out there, we put it on the internet, people could call up and say, my house flooded, and they could give us the information so we could start capturing that because I knew that there would be some reappraisals requested. Then, of course, how do you capture all this data? And we have a collector app that I'll talk about shortly that we use in the GIS day during Memorial and Tax Day floods. Because guess what? To date, we have driven over 250,000 parcels to look at in the county. Now, when I talk about emerging technology, we were closed, and this is my hen scratch on the left, of how could we build. We had a homestead exemption app out there that we utilized, and I don't know if anybody knows this, but we can get, because the state law requires to qualify for your homestead, your driver's license has to match the address that you're asking for. So a few years, we created this app where a person can take a snapshot of the front of their driver's license, the back of it, send us that information on this app, and immediately, if it goes through the gyrations and the workflows, it'll look and see if that information matches. And if it does, we'll grant the exemption right away. We then started having the same thing happen when people would get their iFile number and they would lose it and they would need it. They can use the same app for that. So I was sitting there at home and I said, why not do something like this? And guess what? From 4 days from concept, we had this thing executed and we were testing it. And of course, laid it out there, and this worked on the Android and iPhone platforms. And we had a bunch of property owners, because we got a bunch of the media to pick up on this, that they would go to this app, they would put in their driver's license, and it would show us flood, if they flooded or not, and how much in depth, because that's very important when you look at doing the reappraisals. So we hadn't even had our office, we weren't even back in the office. I mean, the executive staff, we had some of the executive staff that could not come in, but I had meetings once as soon as we could traverse through the county, and we started doing things like this, and you had to do this, because we would still be looking at houses. You have to use the technology. And we're missing a slide here. I might have picked the wrong. Anyhow, if you go to our website right now, what we also did is we wanted to have something out there on our web interface that says, what is reappraisal, what's going on? And I will tell you this, we got more educated from the assessors, ourselves, and the phone calls that we were getting, because these were calls that everybody was wanting to know these things. And if you went to our website right now, you can see a question segment that would lead you through 7 pages of different questions that with regards to all the notices that we send out. We can't send out novels every time we send out a notice, so you can get that information. We also are in the process, and we've got a lot of letters out there where these people are getting their notices, and I'm going to explain that more in detail in a minute, but they can take their account number and they can take their PIN that we provide to them, and they can provide us additional information on what we observed out in the field, and they can also upload up to 25 megabytes of information. Now, looking at the leveraging of technology, this slide gives you an idea of the apps that we use. And when you look at the red pixels, we started collecting this information and throwing it into our GIS layer so we could start seeing where property owners were letting us know this property flooded. We also had people in the field the first week that we were back. We had to get them out there on paper, and I'll explain that here in a minute. And then we also poached data out there. You can go out there and find data where you can get pictures of information, where these pictures were out there on social media, and you can capture the geocode information. You can then utilize that also as data points that you can use to determine what kind of property was flooded. Now, of course, everybody started talking about reappraisal. And when we talk about reappraisal, the county was talking about it, the city was talking about it, and HISD was talking about it. The other 500 jurisdictions were talking about it. There was pressure being given by the citizens that were flooded. There was pressure given by folks in Austin, because in the past legislative session, we had a bill out there that was requesting that this reappraisal be done and make it mandatory. Now, you all know the fight that goes on between Austin and the local folks, and it was kind of interesting that I was in Austin Tuesday, and those folks in that Senate committee, some of them were sitting there talking bad about FEMA, how we would have a better idea of how to run this at a state level. The federal government doesn't know what they're doing, but at the same time, they tell the local folks that the local folks don't know what they're doing. They can do it better in Austin. It's kind of a little odd that you hear that kind of rhetoric going on. But you look at the law, and when you look at this law right here, this is disaster reappraisal. A little guidance is needed, and I say a little guidance is needed. When you look at our tax code, it's over 500 pages. Less than a quarter page is devoted to section 23.02. It says that the governor has to declare a disaster through a declaration. He did that August 23rd. They have, if a taxing jurisdiction wants to have a reappraisal done, they have to pass a resolution. And then if the unit asks for the reappraisal, they have to pay a pro rata share. And the appraisal district has to do it as soon as practical. Now, there's serious questions that remain unanswered. There's no deadlines in the statute. We are in limbo, waiting for some other jurisdiction to ask for reappraisal. And how long can a jurisdiction ask for the reappraisal? Could someone come back and say that they want a reappraisal done for height, for example? So in some of the testimonies that have happened since Hurricane Harvey came through, I have testified in various committees telling them that we need to have a deadline that the jurisdictions, and what I've suggested and proposed is 30 days. I'd be glad to extend that for 45 days, but I know with Christine out there, she wants this information, and I understand she needs that information. And the other jurisdictions, I think Kate's represented in here today. Is anybody from the city of Kate or KDISD? KDISD. So y'all want this information. You need that information. At the same time, you know, we're trying to get a reappraisal done for the jurisdictions that have asked for it, and then we've got to get and be very concerned about certifying a tax roll at the end of the year. And then let's not forget that we have to provide the jurisdictions an estimate of value by April 30th of what we feel the value would be for your jurisdiction. So it's been a little difficult. Yes, I've lost some hair. It's turned gray, and it's been a little stressful. Now, when you look at the scope of reappraisal, who gets notices and when? There's nothing in the statute that gives us guidance. And again, when you look at the largest appraisal district in the state, we're being placed under a microscope. I get calls from Austin all the time. So-and-so wants to know this, and it's not just people, legislators from Harris County. These are legislators from the entire 30 counties, because they want to know, how is Harris County doing this? Then, of course, when you look at damaged properties, you got to say, it says, I asked the question, what is damage? Are we talking about physical damage? Your house flooded, you got physical damage? But what about the economic damage that can be done? When you look at some of those areas that were upstream from the reservoirs. And then we move forward, we have to get a resolution from the taxing jurisdiction that asks for a reappraisal. It must be a resolution. It cannot be unconditional. And I will read some of the things that came up in some of the initial resolutions, but when we looked at some of those resolutions, our legal staff sat there and said, this is unconstitutional because the conditions violate Texas Constitution Article 3, Section 1, that taxes have to be uniform. So we had a few of the jurisdictions that were providing us these conditional resolutions, and I was being the curmudgeon that said, we cannot do this based on this. And of course, then that began, and when you look at some of the conditional resolutions, and they've been rectified, thank God, because we've moved forward. And it says property owner must request and participate in the reappraisal process under Section 2302. So it's stating that, and that was one of the conditions that was out there. And then it stated, should the chief appraiser intend to reappraise property which has not been damaged or intend to reappraise damaged properties without the owner's consent, this authorization for the reappraisal shall be null and void. And some conditions also ask for reimbursements. So we've got all that stuff fixed, and of course, that took time. And that created frustrations, and it created frustrations with the people that were affected by the flood, because they were going to their respective governing body, and their governing body was then saying, should we not? And a bunch didn't, and some did. And I don't know what the right answers, but we'll talk about that shortly here of what we've got going on that's happening right now. Okay, so we needed to capture this data. We talked about, we got uninhabitable and habitable. We can talk about that shortly, but we had to get out there and look at all these properties, and we've got a GIS system that we used during the Memorial Day and the tax day flood. But the Memorial Day and tax day flood were very small in comparison to Harvey. So what we had to do is we had to go out there, we had to take all these points that we received from property owners or other agencies and then start creating polygons, and then using those polygons to look at the different elevations that existed within that polygon, and then start building those polygons based on buffer zones, so we would know what property to go out there and look at. And then, of course, this information had to be cached, and we went out there with iPads and had the appraisers out in the field. And like I said, you can't go look at 270,000 parcels and not provide instant review back to the office. And we captured stuff that we needed to know to make our decisions when we went out there and looked at these properties. And it worked out really well. But just caching the data, I had one of the guys in GIS, they were working during the flood, they lost power, they knew what they needed to do, they got power back, and they worked about 2 weeks just caching this data. So when you sit there and you say, well, wow, well, when you look at having the information on all the servers that we have in the office, you have to just take out what you need, and then you have to provide it and make it wireless on this our GIS online. And it was pretty sophisticated, but it did the job, and it allowed us to do the work we needed to do with the technology. Now, of course, how many parcels were damaged in Harris County? Does anybody know? I still don't know. I had people the day after the flood from Austin calling and saying, how many properties flooded in Harris County? I said, I don't know. You know, they called 2 weeks later, how many properties flooded? I said, I don't know. I still do not know the exact numbers of parcels that flooded. And I'll talk about that in a minute, because guess what? It is almost impossible to know the exact number. So I'm going to show you a couple slides, and I'll show you this. And when you look at this slide right here, and I don't know if this thing has a pointer on it or not. Is there? Okay, but it doesn't work up there, does it? But anyhow, if you look at the top right-hand side of those maps, that's where Maid Creek, Cypress, and Bear Creek all merged. That was like trying to flush a toilet, and there is no place for anything for that water to go, and it obviously overflows. Then, of course, you go a little further downstream, and you have the two, the Barker and the Addicks Reservoir, that were filling up. They were needing to disperse that water. That water then had to get dispersed. And then they opened up the floodgates and flooded Spring Branch and a lot of other communities. And that's still being a major discussion that's going on. But here you can just see real quick on the jurisdiction for the city of Katy and Katy ISD. So you've got another issue. You've got these jurisdictions that go into other counties. And you've got to make sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do for your county as the chief appraiser. And in Fort Bend, for example, we've got a lot of properties that the house is actually dissected by the boundary line. So who makes that determination of who should pick up that house and who should appraise it for the disaster reappraisal? Now, I'm glad Christine's in here. She's seen this map before. Ray Charles can see along that bio on the bottom half that all those properties flooded. Pretty simple, isn't it? You've got a floodway that comes through. You get all these property owners from Spring Branch that say, my property flooded. You can see the app that we use. All the red pixels or the red dots are apps that we collected from property owners presenting this information. The green is we got either a phone call or an email from the property owners. And then all the yellow was the stuff that we visited. Now, what's unique about this map is, look at those red dots that are above I-10 or anywhere above that cluster of red dots. You see them sporadically in those areas. And guess what? Those houses flooded. Or they had damage from the storm. They might have had a tree that fell through the roof, or they might have had a tornado drop down and drip off the roof. So those, we have to figure out what happened to them, and thank God they let us know, but it was not an area where everything flooded around it. It was just one piece of property. Now, the other thing that we have is after the flood, I went down to Rockport and talked to the chief appraiser, toured Rockport, and you could see the total devastation. And if anybody has not been down there and you got a day, go down there. I drove around with this chief appraiser. He took me to his office first. His office was gone. I said, "That's your office?" He said, "That's where it was." Everything in that community looks like a bomb went off. They were still not recovering from this storm. And of course, Houston was getting all the attention, and I felt sad for Rockport that they were just left behind. Anyhow, when you go out there and you reappraise and you see that the property's gone, it's pretty simple to determine what the value of that property is if there's nothing there. You just keep the land value off on the accounts and take the improvement value off. We didn't have that. And the reason I'm explaining this is we went out there, we saw the house flooded because we saw the debris in the front yard. And this is our big concern for doing the valuation for 2018 is we cannot see behind those walls. I talked to the appraisers and I asked them, when you go out there, you knock on the door. Nobody comes to the door. They're at work because we're at work. We didn't have to try to determine what is behind those doors. In Rockport, you don't have that problem, but you've got a big problem. You've got a big economic disaster. Here in Harris County, we have to determine that January 1 assessment based on the percent complete, and we're going to do a letter campaign on that after we get through with all the disaster appraisals. But looking at the 2 letters for the jurisdictions that we've done the reappraisals for, the 9, we sent out 2 letters. We sent out one letter that we knew your property was damaged. We knew that you were you had damage that we then would put through a table that I'll show you, and we gave you an opinion of value based on this reappraisal. Then what about everybody else? If you go back to this map, what about some of the people that we missed? We sent them also not a value, but a letter saying, if something, your jurisdiction asked for a reappraisal, if something occurred, please let us know. We gave them an account number and PIN so they can provide us that information. And then the first letter, if they got that value and said, you know, those people at the appraisal district don't know, but my house flooded 6 feet and they estimated it a lot less, they can then upload information and let us know. So how does this affect the property? One, and this is where one of the taxing consultants out there is using, that it's not the cost to cure to determine what your value should be. You had a storm come through, you have a $100,000 house, well, I mean a $125,000 house, and you've got $15,000 worth of damage. Your property should be worth $110,000 to the improvement and the improvement only. Same thing if you had $25,000, simple math, isn't it? You've got that kind of damage, you've got estimates that somebody's going to come back and they're going to repair your house, or you're going to do it yourself. Simple. Well, what happens if the property has a cap? Everybody knows the 10% cap that exists out there. Your property has a cap, and we look at the same scenario, your property's capped at $100,000. You had $15,000 worth of damage, guess what? You get 0 benefit. Same thing holds true if you had a $25,000 worth of benefit. No benefit in disaster reappraisal. Is that a good thing or not a bad thing? I'm asking y'all. Do you think that's fair? Anyhow, I have downloaded the wrong presentation to show you all. And that's okay, but I've got a chart up here that I can pull up and show you all that goes through and it looks at, for just residential, a 1-story house versus a 2-story house. You look at the building footprint, you then determine how much water was in there, and then you put it through a table system that tells you what kind of damage you have. It's pretty simple. You then determine the percent damage, and then you take that off the replacement cost or the improvement value that we have on there. Anyhow, I'm going to flip through. Would y'all, let me think. Okay. Now, with all the 9 jurisdictions that asked for reappraisal, we have gotten letters out to all residential properties except for Piney Point. Piney Point passed a resolution, but never sent it to the appraisal district. And thanks to Christine, and it happened. And they could have sent it to us. It could have gotten lost in the mail. I don't know, but we didn't get it We got told that they had passed a resolution. We contacted them, we got the resolution, and it has a union with another jurisdiction that asked for reappraisal. But we've gotten today all residential notices out for every jurisdiction with the exception of Pine Point. We've gotten all the new commercial values out except for Pine Point, and we will send out the business personal property damage values at the end of next week. And it has caused a lot of work. Now, when you look at I'll jump forward to a slide. When you look at the reappraisal cost, a lot of the jurisdictions were asking, what's it going to cost to do the reappraisal? We told them $25 to $30 for us to do the appraisal for the entire county. It's about $50 that we do the appraisals for all those properties. To date, I guarantee you, we've spent more than $50 per parcel. It is not the solution. We have spent way over $50. We've had to mirror our current CAMA system. We've had to create the fields that are necessary. Getting the certified rollout, we're still working to get that to the jurisdictions, because the next step will be certifying this roll. And then what happens a year from now if someone lets us know that my house flooded because they were removed from their property? What if it happens 6 months down the road? You have to give them the due process rights. So we still have a lot to do. My big concern is the loss of capacity in our office. Just looking at the 270,000 parcels we've looked at, that's 7 weeks of work. We have, this preempts other mandates that we have under the statute. We have to reappraise and look at all properties. We have to measure 2 sides on every property every few years. And of course, it's increased our OT and comp time. Now looking at this next slide, this is the economic impact. How does it affect each stakeholder involved? We look at the property owner first, their market value, if the jurisdiction asked for a reappraisal, or even if they didn't ask for a reappraisal. Their economic impact is their value is dropping down for a temporary period of time or a permanent if it's completely gone. They've got to deal with the repair cost. What if they were insured? They still have to come up with a deductible, so they have to incur some debt. And if they and a lot of these houses didn't have insurance, so their debt load is going to increase. Then, of course, the reappraisal cost that for the jurisdiction have asked for it, some will that has to be made up somewhere. Whether the state reimburses the jurisdiction that have asked for it, or the jurisdiction that have asked for the reappraisals will have to make that somehow up in their budgets. Then you look at the taxing units. The taxing units, all the taxing units will be affected in this county for 2018. We've had a lot of inquiries with regards to various properties that are very significant in their jurisdiction. They might be a chemical plant, they might be a big warehouse facility, but that will affect that value for 2018. Then, of course, the jurisdiction that asked for appraisal will affect their budget for that year. And then look at the long term. You've got long term. You've got buildings that are gone that will not be replaced possibly, but they're gone, so they will come off the roll. You've got you've got the business blight in some areas. Over off of Stubner Airline in 1960 area. I mean Cypresswood. There's a whole area. There's a Gringos there. The Gringos came back into business, but there's some other businesses around there. The CVS pharmacy. Are those back up in operation on January 1 or not? So there's revenue loss that the jurisdictions will not receive for 2018. And I'm here to tell you that I think that people will be shocked that they're not going to see these increases, but they're going to have to somehow come up with what they are going to do. You know, you've got some new construction that will possibly offset some of the properties that are offline, and I call them offline because they're not complete as of January 1st. And you've got a market that is pretty much halted here in Harris County. You know, you would think, and you'll have to start following the sales. Did the property flood or not? HAR, y'all go to HAR, look, every house that is not flooded, they're letting you know. But guess what? The lending practices, not everybody provides lending just here in Harris County. There's lending that comes from all over. It slowed the market up. So we will start registering post-Harvey sales that flooded and post-harvest sales that have not flooded. And the ones that have flooded, were they sold in the condition that the property was in at the time of flood? Was it repaired? Was it not repaired? At what percent complete was it repaired? Over there on Cypress Wood, there was a house, $500,000 house. The people went in there, they gutted, I think 6 feet up. They got it all cleaned up. They got all the chemicals in there. They sold that house for $100,000. Somebody's going to put $100,000 in that property, and they're going to have a $500,000 house. But what is that property worth? Is it worth $200,000? Well, someone took the risk. I mean, come work for us, sir. You know, and those are the questions that you got to look at. And that's going to be the aftermarket that we're going to have to look at. Anyhow, this slide right here just looks at 2017 values. I took the average school district rate per $100. We applied it. We looked at the proration. You've got a house here that was $200,000. It had $100,000 worth of damage. You look at the August 23rd proration, and the difference is $463 on a $200,000 house that lost $100,000 in value. Now, what I did on this slide is I said, okay, if you were to look at all the other taxing entities, the cities and the counties and the MUDs, you look at about a $3 tax rate, and that same $200,000 house that had $100,000 worth of damage, their savings for the homeowner would be $1,076 if all three jurisdictions asked for that. If the property only sustained $50,000 worth of damage, you can see that that dollar decreases to the amount that you can see on the screen, and then of course if it just had minimal damage, obviously there's minimal savings. And where you've got to come between the union here is the jurisdictions are spending $25 to $30 to do the reappraisal. Now, I'm going to pull up my other presentation here in a minute because I'm almost complete, and I'll address questions because I did this specifically for Christine. What's going to happen? Okay? Reappraisal is not the answer, folks. I've told every person in Boston that listened to me, it is not the answer. We've got some folks in the House convinced, and we've got a working group that the Texas Association Appraisal District is working with Representative Shine's office. And what we're looking at is utilizing this four-tiered structure and just giving an exemption. And the exemption would be FEMA looks and determines what type of damage the property had. If it was minimally affected or minor, major, or destroyed, these would be the four tiers. And wherever you fell in, there would be an exemption applied to the account. You don't have to go out there and reappraise. FEMA's giving all the information. We just apply the exemption. It costs the jurisdiction nothing. And I say nothing. It's a minimal to apply an exemption. We've worked with it. We've talked about the city of West where it's completely destroyed. And I think this is a pretty good idea. Well, you go out there and you talk to people in the House, that's who we've been working with it, and then you go to the other side of the chamber and guess what the Senate says? We're not using FEMA's data, you know. Well, somebody has to provide that data. So then they go, well, so-and-so's on the insurance board. Well, let's talk to them. Well, they talk to them on the insurance board, and the insurance board is saying, no, we don't want to give that information out. So this will be a fight that will occur, and what I want each and every one of y'all to do is y'all need to participate in that fight, because disaster reappraisal is not the answer. This exemption is a good solution, and a lot of people are talking about it, and they want to have something done.
So is this a proposed concept and legislation discussion among county?
This is a discussion among appraisal districts and Representative Shine's office. And when I say Representative Shine's office, it's pretty good. I have talked to people on the other side in the Senate, and they like the concept also because they've heard me complain about this is going to affect 2018. You know, I'm more concerned about 2018, and it's going to affect it because the lost capacity of all the hours that we're focusing on reappraisal for. Yes, sir. And I hope it's in this presentation. Okay, this, just real quick, this is our web outreach. If you get bored and suffer from insomnia, want to know anything and everything about disaster reappraisal, go to the website. You can address all the questions, and there's the uploading. I had a couple more slides that I want to show you here. This is the chart that we use to do the disaster reappraisal. And the last slide that I want to talk about. We looked, and I did this quick math, and I'm not going to give this out to anyone, especially Christine, but we looked at the jurisdictions that have asked for reappraisal. You've got Katy, you got Shore Acres, Piney Point. We looked at the accounts in the jurisdiction, how many of those have been set out for reappraisal, and then we looked at the taxable value in the jurisdiction and the percent loss. So we go back to Katy, and the folks from Katy, there's you're going to see just from Harris County portion a revenue loss, and this personal property has not been noticed yet. We also have sent out letters, and this is why I want to tell people, please do not write these numbers down. And I say that because when you go out there, we have sent all these letters out. Charlene said to me she just got her letter. We are having people send us information back saying, my house did not flood. We have a value that shows a reduction, so we're having to change that. Now you say, how can that happen? You're out there in the field, you're driving down the street, you're looking at these properties, you see this one flooded, this one flooded, this one flooded, and guess what? There's one on that house that didn't flood. Why? That elevation was up 6 inches, and that 6 inches kept water from coming in that house. So from an appraisal district standpoint, you know, people say, well, you should know. You don't know, you know, and so you created those polygons that I mentioned, you created those zones, so we've gone out and looked at those properties. So we've had people that have told us those properties didn't flood, that we thought that flooded. We have some, and I think some of it is they don't want anybody to know that their property flooded. Because guess what? You have to disclose that information when you show your property. Anyhow, so when you look at Katie's numbers, that's just for the Harris County portion. If you look at Spring Branch right there, I think, Christine, your total, you're at, what, $500+ million in revenue? You know, and this was quick math last night. It's about $1.9 million revenue loss without personal property, but again, that's going to change based on some of the things that we're hearing back from some of the letter campaign we've made. Anyhow, at this point, I know it's lunchtime, and everybody's looking at me going, why is he still up there talking? Get the heck off that stage. That gentleman's agreeing with it. See, you and me are together. Get some groceries for us, right? Anyhow, does anybody have any questions I'll be glad to address?
I was curious, your app doesn't have the report of loss that time out and certain date. Why would you be looking at countywide and really critical at times?
Why do we collect that data countywide? Because we have to collect the countywide, even though the jurisdictions for Harris County Harris County didn't ask for a reappraisal. But if we don't collect that snapshot when we're out there and we see all that debris out there, we know that that property flooded, we have to turn around and value that property for January 1st. And a lot of the properties as of January 1st, are they going to be complete or not? That's the supply and demand. We've got, we call it the now time. If you want to look at there's builders out there right now that have had their crews leave the company because they can go out there because they have a trade called taping and floating, and they can go buy sheetrock and they can go and take sheetrock houses, and that's that now price, and that now price is about 3 times what higher than what they can get paid for by the builder that's that they were working for. That builder will hire them back up. At the same time, the builder's sitting there going, they've got to finish the house because they've got this house sold to someone, and they're not getting the contract, so they're going to have to pay higher prices for that, so it's going to be passed on to the end user, meaning the buyer. So back to the January 1st, we will be sending out letters to everyone that we know that flooded in the entire county. And we're going to say, we estimated your house as X% complete. And I'm going to pick on Charlene on this. We're going to send her a letter, and let's just say that when we were out there, you know, we saw the house and we said, you know what, it looks like it's complete. Because the drapes are plucked down, the house looks like it's back in order. We do not have Superman vision, we can't see behind the walls, and let's just say that she had all the sheetrock still cut out, and the appraiser goes back and said it was 100% complete. We're going to send a notice out there, and they're going to say, we're going to look at that name, they're going to send me a nasty letter, they're going to say, idiot chief appraiser, you don't know what the hell you're doing, and my house it's not complete. So we're going to send out a specific, I don't know if we're going to make it pink or yellow or blue. I hate to do it blue and cause another flood, but we're going to let every homeowner that flooded know this is your value. If your house was not complete as the first and we haven't made that adjustment, let us know now, because we've got to get those, do what? So when we have those mistakes, I'd rather get those to us as fast as possible.
So are you using the polygon to figure out who's flooded, or are you relying on people individually to
For the reappraisal or for the 2018?
Well, it's for 2018.
For 2018, we're up to 70-something thousand houses. We actually know the flooded. It's a little bit over 70,000 now. And you'll love this. I love government. We have a jurisdiction. I'm not going to pick on them, but they were getting the permits, and they weren't letting us know that these permits were being given. I mean, they were not giving us the permits. So we have a database that we know these properties flooded, but these people have taken permits out. We didn't get a bunch of permits that we just got the other day. Well, then you have the contractors that pull permits. You know, so it's a
So that's probably the question you check the city and for permits.
yeah, if they're doing the permits, but a lot of people aren't doing the permits. They're not pulling permits because guess what? It takes a lot of time to pull a permit, and then there's a lot of bureaucracy. So they say, well, let me just hire someone to bring them in. And of course, if they do it, that's fine. I don't care. I just want to make sure that that value's right for 2018. And it scares me because Martin Zimmer put me on TV a couple times over the years, and I've dealt with him all the time. What about that homeowner that's over 65 that we thought it was 100% complete and flooded? They're going to go in there, they're going to bring the media, they're going to show all these pictures, they're going to pull the TV out and say, look at this house. It's in terrible shape, and the appraisal district thought it was it's full market value. Question, yes,
So
ma'am?
when are those letters going out? Because my concern is we get a preliminary certified value April 30th, and we get all these protests, and we relied on something that's, I mean, how good is our values going to be at April 30th?
I would love to change that section of the law, and I know it benefits y'all, but this is when it really scares me. How do I know what the value is going to be? And I'm going to tell you this. I was talking to a jurisdiction the other day, and the Daikin facility, the chemical plants on the east side, some of these big plants where people really rely on this value, and they file an amended rendition after. What happens then? And I know we keep up with that and we let the jurisdictions know, but it's in areas where those single things can be so significant to that initial estimate we sent to the jurisdiction provided April 30th. Now we're going to compound that problem by saying we have to determine what kind of loss is going to exist out there with Harvey. And as I mentioned, we've got a tax consultant that is going to protest every account that they have in the Woodlands Township. Well, the Woodlands Township is a small jurisdiction. Well, in the Woodlands Township, there was 200 properties, I think, that flooded. Well, of those 200 properties, they represent more than those 200. They represent almost 1,000. And they're protesting every one of them. Now, we're not going to let them protest that, but this is a fight outside of the fight because there's no guidance in the law. It doesn't say you can come back and protest again just because you got this letter. And that's why we were real careful that we did not call it a 2519 notice. We called it a disaster reappraisal notice.
So that's going to go out before April 30th?
Our whole timeline is being pushed back. I've got people working Saturdays, and I'm working Saturdays just because that's my big concern is what are we going to do for the April 30th estimates. And what I would tell you all, and I will tell you all at the meeting, do be very cautionary be very precautionary in some of these areas where one property can affect your jurisdiction significantly.
We're highly industrial, we have huge values that could be affecting us.
It could make it's a big change.
Oh, yeah.
And as you know, as we go through the hearings process, we make updates to that. And as soon as we find something out that's going to affect it, we let you know. And we'll let you know as quickly as possible. But that's my big concern. And doing that April 30th, guess what? You don't have all the exemptions by that day. You don't have any of the renditions, but we have to determine what that value is going to be. And I don't know if you all know, but this last session, I went up there and I had 7 initiatives that we put into 3 bills. And a bill in Austin to get passed, there's about you get 5,000 bills filed, you get maybe 20% passed, 18 to 22% passed. We put those 7 initiatives into 3 bills, we got all 3 passed. I don't know if I was on a high or whatever, but it was luck, it was something. But anyhow, one of them was to move the protest deadline to May 15th. So we've got a new protest deadline. The other one was to change the rendition date. Instead of the rendition filing of April 15th, we got that moved to April 1st. Of course, then they've got some extensions, so we'll be able to get that data a lot sooner, that we can get those notices out, so we can let the jurisdictions know sooner. And that was so that was something that was good. The other thing that I did was, that I said what I brought up there to fight on, and was the, what do you call it, the Freeport, that they had all the way up until the day before the account was certified to provide us that information. And my fear was a big facility say, oh, by the way, I've got 50% here in this Freeport. We gave the jurisdiction in April a full 100% of that value, 50% just got lost. And we moved that deadline up, like, I don't remember the exact date, but it's May, or I think it's in May. I think it was May 1st, but don't quote me on that. I don't remember that date, but it moved it. It took it out of the day before certification. They couldn't send us a letter the day before the appraisal district approved the records. Any other questions?
Well, as far as the projection for April, do you see that as flat, less, in terms of comparison to the year ago, or where we're at this year?
Can you turn that tape recorder off? It's going to be dependent on the jurisdiction. I think you're going to see, if you look at the big 3, if you were to look at just the county, for example, I think you'll see the county flat because it's such a big jurisdiction. A percentage point here or there is not going to affect it. It depends on the new construction in the area or how much devastation Harvey caused. I think.
But what we saw when we had Ike, the first year was actually flat, didn't come down until the second year. That's what we saw the effect of a hurricane. Which this was, I think, probably, would you say, more impactful than Ike?
Harvey was a lot more, it provided a lot more impact on this county. Because you stopped the real estate market. And what we're seeing is some of these sales that are occurring after Harvey, they're not significant enough sales to change values. You know, you've got to look at your market and determine how many sales you have and determine whether there's sufficient sales to increase or decrease or going to change that market. And then, of course, you get a lot of these sales. I mean, if we looked at them, when we look at them, we got to see, was it damaged? And most of them, some of them are, and you can't use those. You're going to lower value. But I think for the county, you'll see flat, maybe a little increase. And specifics, I mean, I'll see all y'all in April. And Mary Ann's going, yeah, you better be right? It's be interesting. Anyhow, well, I think it's lunchtime.
Thanks to Harris County Department of Education and Jesus for having us out. This is the first year we've actually done the award for best practice in school budgeting. The project itself has actually been going on for about 5 years now since we were in the inception of development and actually researching and developing the best practices themselves. So, hopefully it's something that you have some takeaways that you can take and to use your own budget process. We're not just here to advocate for the award. We'd love to have as many people apply who would like to. Really, it's about utilizing the resources that we have out there to help improve your budget process itself. We've kind of found, I started GFOI about 3 years ago, to help further the push and the outreach and to talk to more people about best practices in school budgeting. But as a part of this and working with folks like Jesus on budgeting for GFOA, we've actually kind of taken a new direction in terms of how we approach our advisories on budgeting and best practices actually developed for budgeting. If you take a look at our website in the past, we tend to be a lot more document focused, a lot more document heavy than anything else. And really we're kind of changing and using a bit of this. You're either kind of pioneers or guinea pigs, depending upon how you like to look at it, in terms of the schools and the community colleges to offer more practical advice on kind of the actual development of the budget, not just the production of the budget document. In addition to that, really, what you'll see as well, we'll actually be coming out with a new budget monitoring piece as well, which offers you a nice 2 to 3 kind of page checklist. That's help think about the pieces that go into budget monitoring, routine evaluation of your actual versus the budget, how you communicate those, how you engage folks on those. To use it as advice for more ability to take corrective action to see what you can do in terms of discussion with your schools, your departments, et cetera, in terms of making new adjustments or making adjustments to those course directions. So again, it's really kind of, it's not just about the school budgeting, it's not just about the budget document. We really just wanted to have more involvement in terms of what we can do to offer you support and advice on everything else that goes into the budget, the whole of what you do in terms of budgeting, and not just that budget document. So that said, the first slide or two here is really just kind of talking about some of the background as to why we're looking at doing this. From working in the budget process yourself, we're typically talking about, where the doomsday scenario kind of leads off the budget process. We have a shortfall, the state is doing strange things to us. We have a lot of revenue fluctuations, expenditures continue to go up with, the cost to hire quality staff, et cetera. Again, it's looking at much more of a reactionary as opposed to maybe more of a proactive type of discussion in terms of what's going to be going into the budget and the actual development of that budget. The other big piece too that we wanted to talk more about, and again, it's not so much of just being a budget process, but also really budgeting and planning process. It's not just that one allocation of resource process alone. It's not how you integrate that. And as part of that too, how do we really start to tie back the resource allocation piece and the student outcome piece? We really wanted to talk more about how we integrate that so we can actually evaluate whether or not the dollars that we're spending are actually being effectively spent as well. To have some of those more of those honest discussions in terms of how whether or not this money is actually being paid for the buck that we anticipated. So with that, we talked a lot about over the last couple of years. I think in general as school districts, how to do key performance indicators, performance metrics, et cetera, and how do you tie those back into the actual allocation of resources. And it's not always that easy, right? There might be some really grand attempts initially to set up those systems, get those metrics in place, but then how do you follow through consistently on that as well? Say with administration changes, maybe there's some loss of interest in how you do that. How do you really make those kind of efforts sustainable as well? That's one thing we kept in mind too as we helped develop this new framework for improving budget processes. So it's kind of what we hope with the best practices in school budgeting, what we've seen today from working with early adopters as part of this and part of our what we call the Alliance for Excellence in School Budgeting as well. And now from the first submissions we've seen from the new award for best practices in school budgeting is really folks are starting to incorporate these principles that we're advocating for through the best practices in school budgeting. Having much more robust ties back to the strategic plan of the district. Really how do you make those connections and have those strong connections? A lot of them have to do with some of the initial steps that we advocate for in the best practice itself, like collaboration, better communication. Just those very basic principles on their face, but often, sometimes those more basic principles are the ones that are more difficult to actually implement and get traction on those too. So, what we hope to with helping to lay out a better budget process is enhanced credibility, on a national basis as well in terms of folks adopting and implementing things that we advocate for. Since we embed these continuous improvement principles throughout, looking at the budget process to make sure it's effective in addition to the more traditional continuous improvement principles in terms of looking at the student outcomes and the connections back to the resource allocated. In addition to also advocating for a very robust strategic financial plan as well. So the project development, I alluded a little bit to this at the start of it. So we started the development of the actual research and writing of the best practices. All of them are available online. We have a publication. If you'd like a book afterwards, I have at least 5 or 6. So if you want to come on up and grab one, I don't necessarily want to take them back with me. So I'd be more than happy to read those. So we really use that and develop those the guidelines, kind of the theory and the concepts behind the best practices in school budgeting. And then at the same time, there was also this project called Smarter School Spending, working with 4 districts to really intensively pilot the principles behind the best practices in school budgeting. And really, we do that Smarter School Spending, a whole host of resources were developed that you can download for free, that you can access, incorporate, make your own, and incorporate those into your budget process as well. And then really, the next step in what we're doing right now with the first year of awards submissions coming in from the employees budget to be awarded for best practices in school budgeting. And what that will allow us to do is, with all the resources and the information that we get from these districts who are applying for the award, we'll start to make those readily available to folks too, and point to specific examples as to how, say, this budget document, this goal-setting example, this prioritization exercise, really hold up some of the principles we're advocating for, and we really think that they resonate well in that district, and they'll resonate better. They'll resonate on a broader basis as well. As a part of that too, we've also had the Alliance for Excellence in School Budgeting, which is kind of an expanded early adopter group. We've worked with over 100 districts over the last 3 years, including at least 4 or 5 in Texas, to help pilot, help support them in terms of implementing best practices in school budgeting. So really what we have, and really the key set of best practices in school budgeting is 5 major areas. Planning, there are 7 instructional priorities or instructional strategies, the strategies that you want to pursue in order to achieve your goals. How do you pay for those priorities? How do you implement them well? And then finally, how do you ensure sustainability over all of this? So the one thing I always like to point out when we take a look at this slide or just kind of show the initial framework is really it's about the setup. We're much more focused on the initial getting folks around the table, engaging stakeholders. How do you really robustly develop these strategies before we're actually talking about the allocation of resources that you would probably traditionally lead with in any budget process. On the flip side too, we also talk a lot about how you're actually going to implement and make sure you, as one of our districts say, implement with fidelity as well, making sure that you see these strategies through the end. So with that, just real quick, there's how they're a related slide. We have the guidelines of the best practices, the toolbox that has the Smarter School Spending resources, we finally the peer review aspect of the board. But everything is centered on those 5 kind of key core concepts of planning, compare, down, to ensure sustainability. We also have an infographic as well. The handout I actually gave you is what we call a roadmap, but on the backside as well, we actually have the infographic. More for kind of visual learners who's being engaged the academic folks to a very high degree as well. So again, the first step here is looking at that plan and compare, bringing both sides to the table, setting up the instructional priorities, looking at evidence-based research, root cause analysis, the goal development, and the actual allocation of the resources to the pay for priority step. Then the implementation of the plan, how you really make sure that these strategies are going to achieve those outcomes over the long term, and then hopefully ensuring sustainability and achieving the outcomes that you're looking for. So what we say when implementing the best practices is we're not looking for you to completely throw out your budget process and start over from scratch. Really, it's about doing a self-assessment to see where you're at and where you want to go. That's one reason why we hand out this one document. We actually call it the roadmap. It lists out all 5 of the major areas I just described with the 5 color-coded areas. But underneath each one of those are several sub-steps. And what this does is it helps lay out in terms of levels of implementation from level 1 in terms of kind of initially when you get your feet wet, stay in a certain area all the way up to kind of the full level of implementation level 3. Then we have with the yellow highlighted boxes that are going to be more foundational. And then initially what we take folks through when we do a longer training on this, or say the Alliance for Excellence in School Budgeting workshop, is we actually ask folks to use this as a self-assessment device. So taking a look and viewing which areas you might need more help on, which areas you think other folks within the district realize that you need more help on as well, and use that as kind of your initial, like I said, roadmap to help begin to implement the best practices. 2, what folks kind of see when they start to look at the roadmap is you might be doing already 50% of the things you're advocating for, or 75% plus of the things you're advocating for. Then it's really using the best practices in school budgeting as a way to kind of stitch those efforts together as a framework to bring all those pieces together and make it more of a comprehensive process. And again, the other thing too, to kind of make note, even though we lay it out in a very linear format, with something like the roadmap or with our guidelines, it's not necessarily that you have to start in box 1A up in the left-hand corner and work your way down all the way to the bottom right-hand corner. It's really thinking about which areas would resonate and which areas you need the most improvement. So the award that's related to development, Jesus asked that kind of build some of those components in there. You have the vote page of the award, so you'll see how some of that corresponds a little more specifically to that. But initially, here's the 4 key components of that. We have the traditional award application, ask for you to submit your budget document, but the 2 kind of different things with this is we actually have an interview with the academic and finance leads from the organization to talk more about the budget process and what it's actually done for the organization and how it's assisted the organization. Then in addition to that, we also ask for supplementary materials, working documents, etc., that are kind of an example of how your district goes about conducting itself, and kind of this example of what your thought processes are as well. So just some things to kind of keep in mind as we walk through this. Judgment process there, you can read that on the slide yourself. I think Jesus has made the copies available. The one thing is we have a 6-point scale now, and we put much more emphasis on actually making progress or showing progress in key areas as opposed to just being sufficient or actually meeting the criteria themselves. So I wanted to just take a pause for a second. This is what we call a liberating structure that we use with presentations. Just for a chance for you to stop and kind of think for a minute about what is the most difficult part of the budget process that you have control over. How our 1, 2, 4 all works, and maybe we'll skip the 4 on this. We'll just do it at 1, 2. Take just 1 minute to think about that for a second. Silent kind of self-reflection in terms of what is the most difficult part of that budget process. Then I'll let you know after that minute's up if you want to turn to the person next to you and talk a little bit about that. We'll just kind of quickly share out in terms of what you feel is the most difficult part of that budget process here. So that's it. I'll give you a minute to think about that. All right, if you want to turn to the person next to you or kind of in your nearest vicinity, and I'll let you know when 2 minutes is up.
It's more like, you didn't budget for something like you didn't budget. They always said that.
I'm gonna wrap up that thought and,
That's what I
kind of quickly ask
Every time you're-
folks to share if possible.
I let them unpack this. If it had, I feel like this is what you have, this is what you spend, here's your dues.
So what's the most difficult part of the budget process that you actually have control over? I always have to put that qualifier of what you have control over, because when I throw that question out there initially, everybody would say, well, we're waiting on the state. So, it was helpful to kind of put that qualification in there, so folks would elaborate a little bit more about their actual internal process and something.
That appraisal and commission support drives a large component on some of the budget.
Sure.
And as you can tell from his problems he's having, you're guessing.
Yeah. Now, is that a problem you have consist every year, not just with that kind of unique Harvey type of situation?
Well, it's just like with the TDA calculation, they still forget. There was a little piece in there for Harvey reimbursement. Has anybody seen the formula piece pop in yet? I'm calculating because they haven't even figured that out. But yeah, that should be part of your numbers, but you're not figuring it out.
This is for your FY19 budget, which is right around the corner. Other parts of the process that can cause some headache or concern?
Getting buy-in for another,
Sure.
you know, that's what we talk about.
The instructional, that's a different people. And a very dominant.
Yeah.
And they're not financing people technically.
Well, they expect you to have the money tree in the back here.
They
So.
certainly do. There's more of them than there are of us.
Outnumbered as well.
And like, we just gonna do a staffing study, like, so I'm going to do an analysis of each campus and I send it to them. And then we meet afterwards, so I did the first campus this week. I sent it on to her and it shows that there's 8 teachers over staff, or was 7. And I said, you know, there are some you have on your position that says you may determine, and we're not replacing them. And she responded back to me, oh, I've already hired somebody. And they're going to start tomorrow, and this person I've already sent in a letter. We're supposed to be free.
And they were aware of that as well. Yeah.
Well, we have been able to show the impact of different options in terms of, if you choose this staffing model, you know, your custodians are going to clean 20,000 square feet, it's going to cost this. If they're going to clean 25,000 square feet, it's going to cost this, and you can have some savings there. How clean do you need the buildings to be? So we do have influence over providing, you know, data to help make decisions, but other than that, you know, unlike working in a city government where it's more local control, I mean, I was surprised by that education, it's so regulated by the state. There are so many things that are predetermined, we don't really, you know, venue's determined, we don't have really a whole lot of influence over that part of the equation, so, you know, a little bit of influence over maybe how we spend the money, and there's not a whole lot to spend, so.
And you're probably asked a lot more advice on the operational side as opposed to, you know, being contacted and involved when there's new major instructional initiatives, even though that pot is so constrained because you already have class size teachers that you need to provide for IEP requirements that you have to meet, et cetera.
Well, they keep giving us these directives, and with no funding, you know, we're good, put in all these cameras for special ed, put in all this, and there's no funding to go along with any of it, so, you know, it's aggravating, really.
She has a real good example of being
Yeah, things like that, really lost the traditional day
Okay, yeah, the redistribution of wealth and
So that's
Texas.
why we're here, staff is going to be, context for this in our budget. I don't think it registered.
Yeah, no, I think the thoughts and concerns of what you express aren't necessarily specific to Texas, specific to Harris County. It's pressures that we've seen, across the U.S. as we've talked to districts too, and I think it's a big part of the reason why we've started to develop a framework for schools in particular. So, any other comment? I kind of focus on this side. Is there any comment from this side of the room in terms of budget process? That is kind of some of the points.
Yeah, the people you mentioned getting buying, getting input, they used to just, okay, so send the budget and you do everything. Being part of the decision making, part of the analysis as well.
Yeah.
Getting them involved.
Yeah. No, and I think that's the perfect segue, and thanks for your insights on that. When we talk about the initial stage of the whole plan and prepare, and again, I'm not going to hit every single slide as we go through it, so if you see me skipping over things, I think Jesus, you did provide it, shout out to everybody, so, and there's a ton of information online as well. What I really want to do is kind of hit some of the key highlight points of things that you can take away to maybe use, if not utilizing the entire framework, at least some small bits and tools and pieces that we have within the broader basis that you can take away as well. So the first step that we really advocate for, and we view it as being the only essential step if you want to become an early adopter with us through some of our support groups, is the whole academic finance partnership. We really feel that you can't have an effective budget process, you can't have an effective planning process without involving both sides of the house. Typically, we see a lot of operations that are very much siloed. I know from working in a district myself, the head of special ed that I worked as the operations director for, she didn't even want to have a meeting with me as her finance person. Part of the reason why I work for GFOA now, amongst other reasons, I'm sure. But you have to be able to break down those silos, have that collaboration. We feel that's really the essential key step here. You need to have that decision making. Even if you think it's just a financial decision or it's just an instructional decision, having that diversity of perspective on the table, we really feel is necessary for the leadership of the organization to be fully informed, but also to get that buy-in and get that understanding that, if you have, say, the transportation folks at the same table as, say, the instructional side of the house, they'll be able to start to see what they're pushing for, what they're advocating for, and why, maybe their priority isn't the number one priority of the district, even though it's the number one priority in their minds for their specific area. And the same way with buildings as well. You could broaden this out, and we've seen this in terms of bringing more principals around the table. Yeah, maybe this one school on this side of town is advocating for additional teachers, additional resources to help further certain initiatives, when maybe the school on the other side of town is just trying to scrape by, in terms of maybe having a different socioeconomic mix, they need additional supports for the students that they have there. Again, so you can see that perspective, that broader, bigger picture. We really feel that that's one of the biggest keys of really having this better budget planning process. So things that we advocate for in terms of setting up the process is making sure that you have responsibilities and accountabilities clearly laid out. Where does the buck stop for certain decisions? Financial, obviously, that will reside with the finance director and CFO. But how does that structure work for other key decisions that can be made? And also, too, setting up kind of key statistics and metrics of measurement for the actual budget process itself to make sure that the budget process isn't overly taxing on people, isn't overly difficult, or viewed as oppressive, even though the budget process would be viewed as oppressive no matter how well it works to some degree. But again, making sure that people really feel that they were engaged in part of the decision-making process, and that ultimately it made quality decisions. It helped really, like it says up here, push the bar for students overall. I have an example, some interview questions. If the award is something you'd like to participate, we have those online as well. And then really through every section too, and these are the slides I'll skip over, you can actually go back and read case studies about districts that have worked in terms of implementing best practices to see how some of these concepts, how to take those back to the district and how they've actually benefited on the ground as well. So the next step here is talking more about principles and policies to help guide the budget process. So we really view the budget principles as really kind of helping to set the stage, kind of set the framework in terms of what the budget process is intended to do. Keeping some of those kind of key tenets in mind when you're making these difficult decisions about what strategies to pursue, how to allocate resources. One of the big ones to point out here that we really advocate for is the whole equality versus equity, hence the graphic up there. Making sure that people understand why kids like special ed kids, title eligible students receive additional funds. Making sure that that is clearly laid out in the space so you don't have that kind of seems to be a continuous kind of point of contention to some degree as to why some students receive additional resources. Another big one up here is transparency as well, and also taking that long-term perspective. You have a kid from say as early as age 3 or 4 out to 18, 19, even 21. You're not going to be able to impact decisions and affect changes in a one-year period like we typically think of with the July 1 and June 30th mindset of the budget. So again, making sure you take that longer-term perspective, we feel another area that's key as well for folks to realize that and make sure that's kept in mind. The financial policies, the three that we really emphasize heavily with the development of best practices are the general fund reserve, definition of a balanced budget, make sure that it's board adopted policy that one-time shots are not a solution for balancing your budget. And then also the asset maintenance and replacement, which, as you all know, deferred maintenance can really impact by shooting rear end, so making sure that that's at the forefront too. That even if it is a can that's kicked down the road, it's in people's mind that, yeah, this is something that is important in terms of our long-term sustainability in terms of the organization. And we actually have examples if you're looking for how to structure a general fund reserve or definition or the balanced budget. You can actually pull down 2 or 3 page policy templates online. You take those and make them your own or in Word. And we actually have examples from Portland Public Schools of their budget principles as well. So the next step here is really to help set the baseline expectations in terms of what it currently looks like. In terms of student achievement that you currently have, in terms of your district, so you know what your baseline is and where you can see growth in terms of these strategies that you're pursuing and funding as a part of the budget process. So, really, the big things that we point out here is making sure you have a well-rounded perspective of what data you collect. Not just focusing on the whole standardized test, but also taking a look at interim year results as well, in terms of how a student progress, say, over a semester, what have you. And also taking a look at things like relative improvement as opposed to just blanket pass-fail type of improvement measures as well. And then again, emphasizing the whole change over multiple years as well. The other thing here is really emphasizing the data aspect of it. Making sure that you really have that culture and that climate to utilize data and making sure data is utilized effectively as well. We all probably know or have known in organizations we work for where you kind of have that data gatekeeper who kind of holds all the data really close to the chest and doesn't really dole that out very easily. That's one thing we kind of want to move away from, but also keeping in mind too that data needs to be used correctly, and if it's used incorrectly, it can have some pretty severe consequences as well. So again, making sure that the data is broadly available, but also folks know how to use it, they know the context behind it, they know what it does show and what it doesn't show, so to speak. High-level data example that we have here is just to kind of illustrate the point in terms of long-term perspective. Sorry, it's not really clear up here, but hopefully you can see a little bit clearer with the PowerPoint that Jesus sent out. Showing that this is college and career metrics for the school district in Oregon, and they're going back and they're starting to look at assessments from that run in kindergarten to help inform whether or not their students are going to be college and career ready at the end of their 4 years of high school. So again, you're talking about a 12-year perspective in terms of information there, as opposed to say maybe just a 4 or 5. So next step we have here is talking more about communications in terms of engagement points that you can use. And the big thing here is we talk about the components of the engagement in terms of being able to convey to folks what is involved in terms of the process, explaining the decisions as well. The tool that drives that is the concept of procedural justice, where people feel as if they understand the process, they have a higher degree of confidence in the process overall. So being able to help explain those decisions, what the process looks like, really help overall lend credibility to the decisions that are made throughout the budget process. The second part of this is talking about the communication strategy as well. Kind of the four pieces that we have up there listed are thinking about the credibility of who your messengers are. It might be if you're in a district where the superintendent's extremely popular or a particular board member's popular, they might be one of the best messengers to go out there. But when you think about it, your parents within your organization really have daily contact or maybe weekly contact more with the principal at the building level. So being able to get the buy-in and bringing the principals in and involvement in the decision-making process is crucial, so they can be some of the advocates and the messengers for some of the decisions that you're trying to make. Another thing to point out here is thinking about the communication channels as well. I always kind of laughed initially when somebody mentioned backpack stuffings when I first started with GFOA as being an effective communication device. And then my son started school and I realized how effective of a tool backpack stuffings are. So again, just thinking about all those different channels in terms of trying to get the information out, to get buy-in behind some of the strategies you're trying to pursue. So another district example we have up there that you can take a look at and download is talking more about this Traverse City, Michigan school district in terms of how they use communications effectively throughout their district to adopt some new curriculums, but then also they actually close the school building as well. And now they felt communications was really a key part of being able to buy-in from the community. So the next step here that we're going to talk about with the best practices are setting instructional priorities. It's talking about development of goals, root cause analysis, development of those instructional priorities, and finally the evaluation of those. So again, this speaks back to the whole collaborative nature of what we're looking for in terms of this budget process improvements. Really making sure that everyone is around the table when these key decisions are made. So goals, how many folks have heard of or used the SMART goal framework in their district? Okay, so quite a few folks. So what we've done is simply taken that SMART framework and we've expanded upon it. So we've taken it and included the resource aspect of it, which I always thought was missing when I worked in the district myself. We're talking about these major, kind of laying out major policy directions for a district, but you're not talking about the whole money aspect of it. It's actually affordable, or what we have to go behind it in order to do these goals well. The second piece that we have up there is engaging. Engaging, I think, is a little bit more difficult to kind of put your finger on, but you'll kind of see from the example that we show up here, it's important to have a goal that folks can get behind, that folks can rally behind. They understand why it's important for the organization to pursue, as opposed to one of those things that you read and it's like, well, okay, I don't know whether or not that's something necessarily we should pursue or not, or I don't really know what we're trying to strive for. So, some other key things to keep in mind when you're talking about the SMART goals is making sure that you take a look at your environment as well. Say if you have a goal for trying to hire better staff for the organization, better teachers, or say you're also talking about maybe a goal of providing improved professional development. If you don't have, say, an effective HR function, or if you don't have an HR person on board at this point in time who are able to do some of that, is it really the time to pursue that goal? You might have to wait on that goal for a year or two to make sure you have the right people on the bus, so to speak, in order to be able to effectively take that goal and try to achieve that goal. The other one here, again, is that whole multi-year aspect as well, understanding that you're just not going to see results overnight or for just the course of one fiscal year. And then also, too, understanding what the baseline performance looks at the school level as well, since that's going to vary, right, from school to school within your district. And the big thing here is talking about how you make that connection from the overall organization goal back and drill that down to the actual school sites themselves. So the schools know what they're working towards and how this supports the overall organization goals as well. Say, since if you have, like the example show up here, a goal to improve learning for ELL students, maybe not every school building within your district has that same proportion. You might have a higher concentration of ELL kids in certain schools, and that's something that's going to be more important for that school to strive for, as opposed to maybe a school who has only a small percentage of ELL students. So the example we have here of the goal that follows the SMARTER framework is from Lake County Schools in Florida. So the major goal is this immediate investment in struggling students. And they have a sub-goal that focuses on ELL kids, since they were a key component of that struggling student definition that they had really focused in on and used as immediate additional support. So specific, that helps to have precision to that goal. Then relevant, it talks about why the specific goal is needed. So it turns out that Lake County was actually spending less on ELL kids than any other district in the state. And then also, too, the ELL student population was growing faster than any other student population as well. So really exhibiting that additional need for that. So what will the district do? Achievable, they laid out a clear path. They're going to talk about the programming options. They're going to compare those options by a cost-effectiveness study that are known as academic return on investment. And they're going to look at the highest return on that option. So what will it cost? Again, they laid it out really round, rough dollar amounts here in terms of about $2 million a year in terms of what the impact will be on the budget. And then finally down here, they talk about what does the district expect. Measurable, it's pretty obvious they're looking for these pretty ambitious graduation rates from their ELL population. And then time bound, again, they're looking for time results in terms of a certain period of time. You don't want to leave your goals open-ended, in terms of, okay, well, we met our goal, but it's 30 years later. Is that really, did you really meet your goal if it took me 30 years to do so? And the last one here is engaging. And that's where this piece comes in. In terms of seeing that even with an actual rate of 2015, a graduation rate of under 60%, they feel by spending this $2 million a year, they can get up to 95% graduation rate for their ELL population over that 4 or 5 year period. So again, that's something they can really rally behind because they've identified a need and they've really laid out pretty explicitly the ELL population have been underserved for quite some time. So the next step here is talking about root cause analysis, making sure that the goals and the strategies that you're going to use in order to achieve your goals are really focusing in on the right problem. So one of the examples we have here from the root cause analysis that we use is called the 5 whys. It's basically asking why until you get to the bottom or kind of the root cause, like I said earlier, what the problem is. The example you can read here, you'll have this on your slide as well, is actually from an actual example from a district. They were taking a look at special education, and they wanted to investigate more as to why their 8th graders who had IEPs weren't up to the same level in terms of academic expectations as the other students. When it came down to it, it turned out the professional development budget was actually controlled by the special ed director. The special ed director only provided professional development on how to support special needs students to special ed teachers. But with special ed kids spending 66%, 75% of the time in the gen ed classroom, the gen ed teachers needed some of that same professional development as well, or we're just not receiving it. So again, they derived from this kind of using this 5 why framework towards a path in terms of how they expanded out their professional development for special education students to all teachers, not just special ed teachers. This next thing here is talking more about the instructional priority development itself. And really the need for that is what we've seen, and this is not just at the school level or at the college level. There's a lot of talk about inputs that go into achieving your goals, achieving your strategies. There's a lot of talk about the outputs, what you want to see from the money that you put into it. But there's not a whole lot of specific discussion about the actual strategies themselves. So that's why we specifically put this section within the best practices to talk more about those strategies in terms of what specific programs, what specific areas that need to be focused on, and how you're going to develop those strategies to actually achieve your goals. The big thing that we advocate for here is looking at proven practices. We kind of say avoid the mindset where you have an academic person who comes back from the latest conference with a shiny new thing. immediately ask for funding of that. We asked to say, take a look more at kind of your situation, your circumstances, and what other districts have used to help overcome some of the same things that you're trying to overcome, or have some really good research that's out there in terms of making sure it's actually going to resonate. So the tips for articulating instructional priorities that we have: make sure they're clear about intent. Make sure you have this cause and effect relationship. We hope by implementing this program that we are going to see this improvement, or we're going to see sustaining of this type of success that we've already seen. Try to keep those instructional priorities also limited in number as well. And one of the things that we advocate for in terms of limiting the number is agreeing on common themes in specific areas to focus on, as opposed to say specific delivery of a strategy. And the example we use is teacher collaboration time. Maybe have an instructional priority strategy on additional teacher collaboration time, but don't have 3 instructional strategies for varying minutes of additional teacher collaboration time. Say one for 30 minutes, one for 60 minutes, one for 90 minutes. Leave that for after it's been determined that that's a strategy that you want to pursue, and then start to cost out in terms of what you can actually afford. Because there might be a whole bunch of difference between the affordability of 30 minutes of additional collaboration time versus 90 minutes of collaboration time, with additional staff and sub-costs that you might need in terms of what goes into it. Some of the examples that we have up here include this instructional priority planner. And on the next slide here, I actually have an example of one of the tools that's in that instructional priority planner. It's called mapping the levers. So we start off with these big buckets here in terms of how you can do something like improve third grade reading. You have kind of the 3 key areas that have been identified as how you can improve third grade reading, say literacy instruction in K3, extended school day, beyond the school day, K3, and then also what you can do before kindergarten as well to help improve that third grade reading statistics. And then you start to see the things that might be viewed more as looking at programs here, or maybe things that you can purchase to help improve the programming, like requiring better literacy materials, increasing the amount of reading instruction, run summer school programs. And when you start to think about in terms of the finance mindset, like we are, these are things that you actually can start tossing out then. We view this as a good tool to kind of help map not only new strategies, but also current strategies that you have as well. Because then you can start to bucket and understand a little bit better all these programs that seem to be all over the place, and start to get a little bit better understanding in terms of what the instructional folks are doing. And it might also help illustrate to them that, hey, we have 15 things that we're trying to do to improve literacy instruction in K3, and they might be able to tell you that, yeah, there's a couple handful of those that we're not even sure if they're effective or not. And we actually have other tools online too that can help you do things like this, like the strategic abandonment tool and a couple of other tools as well. Evaluating the choices between the instructional priorities, really just a couple of tips for evaluation. Making sure that the instructional strategies and priorities that are conveyed put out there for prioritization and evaluation actually meet those guidelines that we talked about a couple of slides ago in terms of cause and effect relationship, being able to articulate a clear intent in terms of what the strategy is trying to pursue, and a couple of other guidelines as well that we mentioned up there. On its face, just making sure that they meet that basic criteria of what a strategy is supposed to be, will really go a long way in terms of making sure that you're pursuing strategies that are really fully thought out and developed in terms of whether or not this is something that can work and resonate with the district today. Then 2, in terms of looking at the evaluation process, think about the consequences of decisions. What does it actually mean if we do this today? Say if it means starting a new program and funding that new program by stopping an old program, what does it actually mean if we stop doing that old program? What are the consequences behind that? And also, too, think about the feasibility aspect. Like I mentioned earlier with the HR example. If your goal is to provide better professional development, do you have the staff in place who are able to do that? Or is this a strategy we should maybe table for another year once we get that capacity in place and built? And also, too, thinking about the public engagement aspect. If it's a strategy that you really feel has a ton of value, but there's not a whole lot of buy-in from the public, what's it going to take in order to kind of prove to the public this is something that they need to be behind in terms of supporting this key initiative of the district? Some examples of tools that we have here, like I mentioned, the priority setting tool, there's a link there. And also speaking back to the whole procedural justice concept to make sure that people understand why certain strategies were selected versus why certain strategies weren't selected. Again, you'll just get better buy-in overall from the decisions that were made from your process. So now moving on to the pay for priority step here. And once I just kind of hit a couple highlights of this tools here, I'll flip over to the budget document quick to show you an example, and then leave a couple of minutes for a couple of questions at the end, since I don't want to be the person who runs over the time allotted on Friday. I think it's probably worse than running as a lunch like the previous speaker, so, or at least his concern, he did very good.
Thank you.
So different types of analysis that we advocate for, offer some guidelines on, are staffing analysis, per unit costs, and then cost effectiveness measurements as well. So some of the power of the staffing analysis, like was mentioned earlier, the one thing that we recommend is making sure that you're trying to, that you identify the clear question that you're trying to answer. The big question that we often see, and one that I would really advocate for, is inequity between campuses. Why does this school get this and this school get that, when seeing on their face in terms of enrollment and other demographics, they're the same. Again, making sure you have that question there that you're trying to answer is really key in the staffing analysis, though. And sometimes analytical tools like just basic per unit cost can help start to highlight certain areas that you might want to take a deep dive on. Like this simple example that shows up here, the cost per student providing core classes such as algebra and geometry is quite a bit less than providing, say, elective courses like art. It doesn't necessarily mean that we should, say, cut art on its face, but starting to get more of the context behind what the analysis shows, we really just feel is key with any one of these analytical tools. It's not, the black and white decision-making vehicle. It's really kind of that initial springboard for starting to ask more questions and try to get more context as to why these analytical tools are showing some of these, possibly glaring differences. Quick example that we have here is the relative cost per outcome. Again, it's really just scatter plotting, say, either classrooms or campuses within a district. The vertical axis here shows performance. High performance is at the top, low performance bottom. And cost, higher cost on the right, lower cost on the left. So when you start to plot these against one another, it's like, okay, well, yeah, you're getting high performance there, low cost. How do you replicate the results there? Or, if you start to look at the school's names or the classroom names, maybe those are your traditionally higher performing schools or classrooms anyway. So maybe it wasn't all of that great of results. Again, the context is really key here. But then we start looking at what happened here in terms of low performance and high spending, and especially what happened on the other side too, with even higher spending and lower performance. You're talking about, say, your traditionally more difficult schools and campuses in terms of trying to get results there. Is it more junior staff, less experienced staff, etc.? This isn't the end-all, be-all, but it helps to kind of frame that next step in terms of questions to ask. AROI, this is an area we're starting to develop even more and more concepts on. We have a whole research paper of it online as well, which you can easily find on the GFOA website. One thing I will say about AROI, I think it was initially kind of proposed as the end-all, be-all for analytical tools. Kind of punch in all of your metrics, punch in all of your financial information, and you're going to get an answer. I think it's really turned into more of kind of a way of thinking about how you can make sure, like the little graphic says there, get the most bang for your buck. But in some cases, that might mean something a little bit different. Like this quick example that we have here, two programs. One is clearly giving a high AROI than the other. But if you're trying to get more additional graduates from what this little example is showing here quicker, maybe spending more to try to get those graduation rates a little bit higher quicker is something that you need to do in order to get traction. Again, it's all about context. It's not just the kind of black and white answer that you might see on its face from doing the analysis. So this next step is talking about evaluating the priorities here. One thing I would point out is this example of the 31 cost savings idea that we call it. It actually walks through a series of questions in 31 areas, both educational and operational as well. And you can really use it as a way to kind of frame discussion at the senior leadership level for areas that potentially do a bigger deep dive. It actually uses data on the back end to benchmark you against other districts to see how you align with not just statistics, not just with performance metrics, but, kind of key questions as to how you actually go about doing business in some of those key areas as well. So we're at the implement plan phase here, and again, not to run over here, two things I want to point out are strategic financial plans. We're seeing a lot of merging between a strategic plan and a strategic financial plan. Since the things that we advocate for in a strategic financial plan are things like stating what your goals are, stating what your priorities are, since those are the things that really help inform when you think about what the ultimate kind of financial trajectory of your district might look like in the long term. Again, just realizing how much interaction and interrelatedness there is between the two. So there's a lot of examples up there. We actually have the strategic financial plan template as well, which you can plug your information into and start to walk through in terms of creating your own strategic financial plan, if that's something you're looking to revamp or something that you would like to pursue. I'll skip over the plan of action and the allocate resources school site. I will say there's a nice case study here that talks about weighted student funding formulas versus FTE type allocations as well, if that's something you're interested in taking a look at. But the last thing here is to talk about the budget presentation itself. The one thing that we're really heavily advocating with these new best practices is trying to get away from the multi-100-page budget document to get down to something that somebody might actually stand a chance of reading. That's one of the biggest drivers behind this. We would like to make it where it's actually more of a telling of the district story as opposed to financial information. So the kind of basic framework that we advocate for with the budget document is looking at challenges, your goals again, your strategies, talking about that financial plan are, your more traditional revenues, expenses, reserve levels, debt plans, etc. And then finally talking about the risks of long-range financial sustainability as well. Having a bit of a discussion on that in terms of how you incorporate some of your financial forecasts so folks can see, we're going to have some significant challenges in a couple of years. It's kind of that preparation process, you start to get that information in front of folks, and then it won't be such a surprise when some of these things happen, or maybe you can start making some of those small adjustments and course corrections now, so that pain point that you can see from the finance person in the near future, you can help to alleviate some of the stress that will cause. The other thing I wanted to point out here, the last one, is actually an example from Goochland County Public Schools in Virginia. This is actually a snapshot of their budget doc. You can actually access their budget doc from that link. They do a really great job of laying out their challenges and making linkages back to the strategies they're pursuing as an organization to overcome some of those key challenges they lay out. Again, it's not maybe 100% of what we're quite looking for yet with the budget document, but it's a lot more of making these connections than what we've kind of previously seen and what we previously even advocated for in terms of the budget doc itself. So again, if you have questions, my email's up there. Whole host of websites you can pull information down. Basically, everything we have out there is freely available unless you want to attend an in-person event with us or you'd like to apply for the budget board. Otherwise, everything is readily and freely available. You can even download the book I pointed out to you. You can download the individual chapters for free as well. You might have to pay for that. So we just hope it's something you find useful and informative and hopefully incorporate some of your day-to-day activities with the budget process. So thanks again for having me.